Hey guys, tonight we're rewinding the clock way back to the stone towers and drafty corridors of medieval castles. You're not a knight or a peasant or even a scheming noble. Nope, you've just been born. A baby girl with royal blood in her veins, a name preloaded with political consequences, and absolutely no idea what's coming next. You've just taken your first royal breath as a princess in the Middle Ages, which sounds glamorous, right? Yeah, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and local time in the comments so we can see whose bedtime aligns with royalty and who's just here for the late night drama. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive screaming, wet and squishy. About average for a medieval newborn, but you're wrapped in way more linen than most. The room you're born into isn't sterile, it's a slightly claustrophobic chamber deep within a stone fortress. The air smells of beeswax candles, dried herbs, and faintly of mildew. Someone's been burning rosemary to purify the air, but let's be real, this is the 1200s, and no one really understands germs. Still, your birth has been treated as a near-holy event. A royal midwife oversees everything, muttering prayers and checking you for any signs of divine favour, or curse. A crooked toe might be seen as a prophecy. A birthmark? Well, you better hope it's a lucky one. There's no such thing as privacy. A crowd has gathered outside your mother's birthing chamber, probably including courtiers, clergy, and maybe even a few nobles peeking through the door like it's a medieval baby unboxing video. If you were a boy, cheers would erupt instantly. But since you're a girl, the applause is more polite, quiet, maybe a little disappointed. Not that you can tell. You're too busy screaming, confused, and probably freezing because medieval castles have the insulation of a wet sponge. You're whisked away to be cleaned, not with any kind of gentle soap, but more likely with wine or vinegar to strengthen you. Then you're swaddled so tightly in cloth strips you resemble a tiny white mummy. They believe this helps your limbs grow straight, but mostly it makes you unable to move. It's like being born and immediately put into a medieval straitjacket. Congratulations. But your true first royal moment comes when your gender is announced to the public. A herald steps out and declares, in overly ceremonial Latin, that a daughter has been born unto the house of insert dynastic name here. Maybe there's a procession, maybe bells are rung, maybe your father pretends to be happy about it, but somewhere in the castle someone is already updating your marriage value, like you're a rare trading card. Your mother, by this way, is still recovering. There's no epidural, no postnatal care team, just a whole lot of superstition, and maybe a nun whispering psalms. Childbirth is terrifyingly lethal in this era, and your survival is celebrated, but hers might hang in the balance. In fact, it's considered so dangerous that women are encouraged to write confessions and wills before going into labour. Yep, motherhood begins with a healthy dose of mortal dread. As for you, little royal baby, your survival is not guaranteed. Infant mortality is brutal. You're born into a class that gets the best food, warmest clothes, and access to rare herbs. But even that's a coin toss. Infection, fever, or something as simple as jaundice could end you before your first birthday. And yet there's already a scribe updating the lineage scroll, writing your name in ornate script like it's carved into history. For all the risk, your existence is political gold. A few strange rituals follow your birth. You're likely baptized within days, if not hours. The church doesn't mess around with the eternal fate of baby souls. The water's cold, the priest mumbles Latin, and someone probably waves incense over your squishy little head. In the royal nursery, charms are hung to ward off evil spirits, like iron keys or saint bones. Actual bones. You might even be laid on a sword during the ceremony, a symbol of your family's power. They say it's tradition. You have no idea what's happening, but the sword is cold, and you're definitely not sleeping through this. Already, your place in the kingdom is being crafted around you. A tutor of heraldry is probably sketching up emblems that will eventually include you. A court poet writes a stanza about your rosy cheeks and glorious destiny. A midwife tells the queen that your tiny pinky finger curved just so, which means you'll marry someone grand across the sea, because of course it does. And here's a quirky little medieval fact. In some courts, people believed that the way a baby sneezed in the first few hours of life predicted their temperament. One cute sneeze. you'll be clever and obedient. No sneeze, you're obviously cursed. There are even accounts of attendants blowing herbs in royal babies' faces on purpose to induce a lucky sneeze. No pressure, infant you. Now, let's talk about the scholarly debates. Historians still argue over how much agency medieval royal mothers had in the early care of their children. Some scholars believe that highborn women were deeply involved, overseeing wet nurses and caretakers, choosing religious tutors and regulating the nursery staff. Others think noble women were mostly removed, spending post-birth recovery and confinement, while wet nurses handled everything, and babies were basically raised by the court machinery. Evidence swings both ways depending on region, rank, and specific household. So the truth? It's hazy. Just know that your own mother may be right beside you, or miles away, recovering with a healing potion and a lot of leeches. So here you are, tightly swaddled, head nestled in silk-stuffed linen, placed in a crib carved with lions and lilies. You can't lift your head yet. You can't speak. But already, your entire life path is shaped by centuries of bloodline, landholdings, and potential alliances. You're not just a baby, you're a diplomatic asset. The castle is quiet now, except for the muffled echo of guards changing shift and a distant owl hooting from a stone turret. In your cradle you squirm under layers of linen, while a nursemaid hums a lullaby in Old French. You're still learning to blink, to breathe steadily, to exist in this strange candlelit world where your every cry is logged, interpreted, and occasionally punished. One day you'll rule lands or broker peace treaties, or maybe you'll die in childbirth at 19. But for now, you just hiccup softly and drift off under the watch of a nurse who smells faintly of lavender and boiled onions. Sleep tight, little princess. You're a few weeks old now, maybe a couple of months, and honestly, you're already a full-time project. Not in the look how precious way most modern babies get doted on, but in the high-stakes, multi-staff, security-cleared way that makes you a breathing political investment. You're not fed on demand, you're fed according to celestial charts. Your cries are noted like omens, and while your parents might peek in occasionally, it's the army of caretakers around you who really run the show. Your days begin with a check of your swaddling, which is still wrapped so tightly you can't bend anything. They believe this helps bones grow straight, because in the Middle Ages people are oddly obsessed with symmetry. To them, it's not just pretty, it's holy. Crooked limbs, sign of spiritual corruption, so you stay wrapped like a spring roll until someone decides your body's hard enough to hold its shape. Let's talk about feeding, because this part is complicated. You're not suckling at your mother's breast, that's way too lowbrow for a royal princess. Instead, you've been handed off to a wet nurse, a lower-ranking woman with a sturdy build, strong reputation, and full milk supply. She's been vetted like a government contractor. Her morals, background and health have been scrutinised to an absurd degree. If she's had sex recently, she's off the list. If her last baby died, off the list. If she sneezes the wrong way, she's gone. The stakes are that high. This wet nurse might live in the castle full-time or in a private chamber near the nursery. She breastfeeds you several times a day, sings to you in her own dialect, definitely not court-approved French or Latin, and essentially becomes your first attachment figure. In some cases, princesses formed lifelong emotional bonds with their wet nurses, sometimes more affection than they ever showed their actual mothers. You might even call her mother in your early speech. That's the kind of tangled, emotional contradiction this life is full of. Your crib is extravagant, but far from safe. Wood-carved lions or saints lean over you like silent judges. You've got no concept of danger, but if you did, you'd notice the fine silks and furs in your bedding are massive fire hazards, and the room's fireplace is both open and unpredictable. But the flickering glow is soothing, and your nursemaid knows how to keep you warm without setting your future on fire. Most days you're paraded out to the royal hall, if only briefly. This is where visiting nobles and clergy can clap eyes on you and murmur things like, "Strong legs for a girl," or "She looks clever." These comments matter. Physical appearance is heavily politicised. If your skin tone seems too ruddy, or your head too narrow, rumours start. There's an entire category of medieval astrology and medicine that reads a baby's features like tea leaves. A wide forehead, you'll be wise, a cleft chin, decisive, a lazy eye, cursed obviously. In certain courts, you're fed special mixtures meant to stimulate intelligence, honey thinned with goat's milk, or soft mashed almonds if you're really fancy. Sometimes you're even given wine-diluted gruel because water isn't trusted. It's basically like getting a baby cappuccino, minus the foam. The results? Probably indigestion and confused crying, but everyone seems convinced you're on track to become a diplomatic prodigy. Now, for a fun fringe fact. Some medieval parents would try to shape their infants' skulls with tight head wrappings to get that ideal, noble dome. The practice wasn't widespread across all regions, but it did happen in some aristocratic households. You'd be swaddled around the torso and then have your head gently, but persistently, bound into a preferred shape. Your nurse might pat your forehead and mutter something about divine proportion while adjusting the wrap. Comfort. Not even on the list of priorities. Meanwhile, music is a big part of your early life. Minstrels are occasionally summoned to play gentle lute melodies to soothe your moods, or monks might chant psalms nearby. Not for your benefit, mind you, more to please the grown-ups and pretend your cooing means you're already holy. Sometimes the court invites local prophets or holy women to gaze upon you, which always ends in either weeping joy or quiet dread, depending on what they see. At the same time, your body is watched obsessively for signs of the supernatural. Coughing fits could be seen as divine testing, hiccups as signs of future prophecy, and heaven forbid you laugh too early. That's the kind of thing that sends people scrambling for relics to hang over your crib. Religious symbolism surrounds everything, from the linens you lie on to the lullabies hummed over you. You're not just a baby, you're a vessel of potential miracles, or demons, or divine retribution. It really depends on who's doing the interpreting. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how rigidly these rituals were followed in different regions. In France and England, some records show more liberal parenting in royal circles, where affection and personal involvement were encouraged by queens. In contrast, parts of the Holy Roman Empire leaned heavier on symbolic rituals and isolation. The truth? Likely a chaotic blend. Customs weren't uniform. Some princesses grew up in warm, attentive nurseries with lots of emotional care. Others were more or less tiny, expensive mannequins for diplomacy. What's consistent is this. Your presence is a chess piece on the royal board, and every burp you make is read like a scroll from heaven. You are the physical embodiment of your family's future alliances, land claims, and peace treaties. Your father might hold you up like Simba from The Lion King during court presentations, but he's already mentally charting who you'll be promised to in marriage by age 3. And here's the real kicker. You don't even get a baby blanket of your own. Most items in your nursery are heirloom objects. The cradle might have once held your mother, or your grandfather. There's symbolism in everything. The linen cloth wrapped around your legs might have been cut from a priest's robe. The bells tied near your bed, blessed by a bishop last spring. Even the wooden rattle in your hand has a carved inscription of a saint's name, because apparently you need spiritual protection and hand-eye coordination. And yet, as dusk settles outside the stone walls, and your caretakers settle you in for the night, there is a kind of warmth here. A lullaby in a half-forgotten language drifts through the nursery. The fire crackles low. Somewhere in the castle a dog barks twice. Then silence. Your wet nurse rocks you gently, one hand patting your back in time with a whispered prayer. Maybe she smiles down at you. Maybe she whispers your future name with something like hope. You fall asleep not knowing that your entire world is built on rituals, prophecies, and the fear of what one little princess might become. You're a bit older now, just past the baby stage, rolling unsteadily into toddler territory, and suddenly you're not just a symbol anymore. You're a person, a very small, very loud, highly scrutinized person, and it's time to give you a name, not a sweet one chosen from a baby book. Number. This name is going to be dissected by theologians, judged by nobles, and possibly double-checked against ancient prophecies. Naming a princess in the Middle Ages is a full-blown diplomatic maneuver. The ceremony is a big deal. You don't just wake up one day and someone calls you Isabella. There are layers. Your name might honour a saint, match a legendary ancestor, or be chosen to please a politically valuable uncle in Aquitaine. It's not about what sounds nice with your complexion. It's about legacy, strategy, and tradition. You might be named after your grandmother to tie you back to her powerful lineage, or after a queen who once brought peace during a brutal war. Cute nicknames? Not part of the package. When they finally land on your name, let's say it's Eleanor because that's a solid royal option, it's announced with a flourish. A priest might chant it aloud in Latin. A herald could read it from a scroll in the Great Hall. Sometimes it's sewn into banners and hung across castle walls. Congratulations, you're now officially a brand. What they don't mention is that your name is also a sort of legal contract. It binds you to the expectations of your family line. If you were named after a fierce queen, you're expected to be sharp, diplomatic, and maybe a little intimidating. If you're named after a pious martyr, well, good luck having any fun. And if you're the third Eleanor in 5 generations, you're now part of a long-running PR campaign for stability, fertility, and successful dynastic marriages. How fun. There's also a chance, just a whisper, really, that your name has already been listed in multiple marriage agreements, even before you've taken your first independent steps. That's right. In the back halls of the castle, while you're busy trying to bite your own foot, adults have been sliding ink across parchment, casually promising you to various dukes, earls, or foreign princes. They write things like, in the event of future alliance, and upon reaching suitable age. You, meanwhile, are still obsessed with chasing shadows on the floor. But oh, your name travels faster than you do. Couriers carry word of your existence and identity to distant courts. In some distant city, a royal boy, not much older than you, is told your name by his tutor and asked to remember it. Because one day, that might be his wife. These names get embedded in political memory, marked on family trees like tiny alliance flags. Eleanor, Margaret, Matilda. They don't sound like toddlers. They sound like chapters in a dynastic war chronicle. Now here's a quirky side note for you. Some royal babies were given milk names before their formal ones. Basically, a placeholder nickname used by wet nurses and staff until the grand announcement. Things like Mina or Tula or even Little Star. It was a kind of private affection before politics moved in. These names sometimes stuck behind the scenes, whispered by servants or embroidered into hidden corners of linens. Small signs that even princesses were once soft, snuggly creatures before they became chess pieces. Once you're officially named, your identity starts crystallizing. You get your own banner, probably embroidered with your family's coat of arms combined with your mother's lineage. It hangs behind your cradle like a very medieval birth announcement. The emblem is stitched in gold thread by someone who's half blind and paid in loaves of bread. But it's beautiful and entirely for show. You're also given a small personalised prayer book, even though you can't read. It's inscribed with a blessing and probably filled with illustrations of animals looking suspiciously like lumpy horses. Still, this is considered one of your first royal possessions. You'll be told it was a sacred gift, handed down for generations, even if it was actually made last Tuesday. By now you're more mobile, maybe waddling around the nursery, pulling at curtain tassels and falling into chairs, and you're watched constantly. Your name is now power, and power can't be left alone. A governess supervises your activities, often a strict woman from a noble but lesser family, brought in specifically to teach you obedience, modesty, and how not to embarrass anyone important. You're reminded to bow, to smile, delicately, and not to shriek like a commoner when startled by loud noises. These lessons begin before you can form full sentences. Outside the nursery, the court is already gossiping about your temperament. Are you curious, moody, sharp-eyed, easily frightened? All of this will be written down and shared, quietly, among those who matter. You're becoming a character in other people's stories, and your name, Eleanor remember, starts to carry weight. There's also a theological layer. Your name is used in prayers, in ceremonies, and even in oaths. Soldiers might swear loyalty to the House of Eleanor if you become part of a key alliance. Monks might write it into monastery records as part of their regular blessings for the royal family. You become immortal on parchment long before you have any idea what immortality means. Now, here's a debate among scholars. Did medieval royal girls internalise their political role early on, or were they more sheltered from it during their first years? Some argue that girls were kept in a bubble of ritual and comfort until they were old enough to understand their responsibilities. Others claim that from the moment they could walk, princesses were coached, corrected, and cultivated like bonsai trees, shaped and trimmed into proper ladyhood. The historical record is patchy, but evidence leans toward the latter. You may not know what the Holy Roman Empire is, but by age 3, you definitely know not to slurp when important people are watching. And here's the emotional kicker. Sometimes, you say your name out loud when no one's around. In that echoey nursery, with cold stone walls and a distant harp playing somewhere in the castle, you whisper it to yourself, Eleanor. Not because you understand its power yet, but because it feels like the one thing that's yours. Your governess corrects your pronunciation. A nurse claps and says, Very good, my lady. But deep down, it's still just a sound on your tongue. You're still figuring out what it means. The castle settles into night again. A fire flickers low. Someone brushes your hair with a carved comb made from whalebone, saying your name with reverence like a prayer. Eleanor, you've only just begun your life, and already the world expects you to change the course of history. You're about 4 now, maybe 5, and the nursery feels smaller every day, not physically, but spiritually. You've outgrown the crib, ditched the linen swaddles, and can almost recite a proper table blessing without messing up the Latin. Almost. Now you begin to notice things, like how your wet nurse no longer kisses your forehead in public, how your governess bows before speaking to you, or how the castle servants whisper when you pass, calling you the little lady instead of your name. Your world is shifting, and it's full of people watching you just a little too closely. The court is obsessed with omens. Everything you do is read like a sacred text. One morning you sneeze during morning prayers. A servant claims it's a sign you'll bring peace. Another day you throw a wooden spoon in a tantrum and hit a noble in the ankle. The court jester turns it into a song. A few people laugh, a few do not. In this world, even your tantrums get circulated like political gossip. You're still surrounded by women mostly. They keep you clean, dressed, modest and polite. Some of them adore you, some resent you. A few, especially the older ones, treat you like a holy object, to be adored but never touched without ceremony. They speak of you in hushed tones when you're not in the room, arguing over whether you're clever like your father or solemn like your mother. Your every feature is examined, your quirks turned into prophecy. If you favour your left hand, someone calls it a sign of wickedness. If you laugh in your sleep, a priest is summoned to bless your bedding. You spend hours sitting still while people arrange you. Hair must be brushed, braided, pinned and occasionally threaded with ribbons. Your clothes are stiff, beautiful, and wildly uncomfortable. You're learning to be ornamental. You learn not to complain, because complaints are unbecoming. A proper princess smiles when her head itches under a lace coif. She thanks the tailor even when the seams dig into her arms. You're learning that your body isn't really your own. It belongs to the court's image of what a princess should be. Your schedule is now ruled by structure. Morning prayers, light breakfast, usually bland, cold and presented with too much pageantry, then lessons. Not real reading yet. Your Latin is shaky, and no one expects you to master theology before your 6th birthday, but you're being taught how to sit through lessons. A soft-spoken tutor walks you through psalms and simple moral tales, each with a moral that usually boils down to obey your elders, honour the church, marry wisely. But what you notice more than anything now is the way people talk when they think you're not listening. The murmurs behind velvet curtains, the servants' whispers as they pour, wine for your parents in the great hall. They talk about you, about who you'll marry, about which kingdom will claim you. Some joke that you'll be queen of somewhere with more sheep than sense. Others mention heirs and alliances and dowries, as if you're already a numbered asset in a giant moody ledger. That gossip doesn't stay in the halls. It makes its way into the nursery, dripping in through bedtime stories and mealtime chatter. One day, your husband might be a great king, your governess says as she spoons warm broth into your bowl. Perhaps you'll bring peace to 2 warring houses. You nod, pretending you understand. But really you're just wondering what a warring house looks like. Do they throw furniture? Let's not forget the astrologers. Yes, you still have those. Bearded men with ink-stained fingers come to read the stars for hints about your future. They unroll scrolls, sketch your birth chart, and point at the ceiling like the answers are painted on the rafters. If Jupiter was rising when you were born, they say you'll be diplomatic. If Mars was dominant, you'll be brave. One astrologer makes the mistake of saying you might have a tragic romance. He's dismissed before sundown. There's a wonderfully strange historical footnote here. Some medieval courts believed that early exposure to beauty could shape a child's soul. So your caretakers fill your room with tapestries, stained glass windows, and carved figurines of saints and mythical creatures. No toys, really, just beautifully rendered objects you're not allowed to touch. A unicorn carved from bone, a knight with a ruby eye. These things surround you like glittering guardians meant to elevate your spirit. You don't know that yet, You just know they're prettier than the stale biscuits at breakfast. You've also started asking questions, dangerous ones according to the grown-ups. You ask why the firewood smells different today, why one lady in waiting no longer comes to braid your hair, why you can't play outside like the stable boys. These questions are met with soft rebukes or redirected with a new book of illustrated psalms. A favourite technique is to quote scripture at you. To everything there is a season. Translation, stop asking why. But sometimes, late at night, your governess loosens. When the castle grows still and the torches flicker low, she tells you real stories. Not the ones from the prayer books, but tales of queens who disguised themselves as knights, of princesses who ran away and lived in towers by the sea. She always ends with, "But that's just a story," and kisses your forehead. Still, you fall asleep imagining that you're the kind of princess who climbs cliffs barefoot, who outwits pirates and returns only when she feels like it. There's an academic debate about how much creative storytelling royal girls were actually exposed to. Some believe fairy tales were actively suppressed for young noble women, who were instead fed a steady diet of moralistic lessons and sanitized saints' lives. Others argue that folklore flourished in the nurseries, told in secret by nurses and older servants. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. An official curriculum of obedience spiced with after-hours rebellion whispered by moonlight. And then, there's the corridor you're not allowed to enter. Every castle has one. It's dark, always cold, and often leads to somewhere important, like your father's war chamber or your mother's private chapel. You're told to stay away. Naturally, it becomes the one place you think about constantly. You tiptoe near it sometimes, just to feel the thrill of forbidden air. One night you sneak halfway down it before your slipper squeaks against a stone. A voice calls your name, your full name, and you freeze. Not because you're scared of punishment, but because you've never heard your name spoken like that before. Not lovingly, not reverently, just firmly, like it belongs to someone bigger than you. Back in bed, tucked under layers of wool and embroidered linen, you realise something. You're beginning to understand the weight of your name, of your place. The castle is your home, but it's also your stage, your prison, your destiny. You're 6 now, maybe 7, and you no longer wobble when you walk. Your steps are light but deliberate, trained to glide across floors that echo too loudly if your heels strike wrong. You've got your own little retinue trailing behind you now, a pair of ladies in training, a governess whose neck seems permanently stiff from protocol, and a nursemaid who still sneaks you honeyed figs when no one's looking. You're not a toddler anymore. You're a functioning member of the royal household, which means you're expected to act like it. Even if you're still losing teeth, everything about your world is structured, down to how you're allowed to giggle. You've got princess posture now, a straight back, hands folded delicately, eyes lowered just enough to suggest humility, but not so much that people assume you're shy. Shyness is not desirable. You're not meant to fade into the stonework. You're meant to shimmer gently, like candlelight on polished armour, charming but not forward, visible but not demanding, polite but not so meek that you can't secure a marriage with a future king of somewhere dreary and rainy. Your toys are gone, replaced with instruments of future usefulness, tiny looms, a stylus and wax tablet, embroidery hoops. You're told over and over that a lady's hands should always be occupied, as idle fingers are the devil's playground. You stab yourself with a needle more than once and cry in silence, because no one wants a weepy princess. That's unbecoming. And you're nothing if not in the business of being become. Your daily wardrobe has tripled in complexity. You no longer wear soft tunics and simple slippers. You have formal gowns for dining, modest dresses for religious instruction, travelling cloaks lined with fur for church, and stiff ceremonial garb for the high feasts. Getting dressed takes a solid hour and involves multiple hands. If someone pulls the wrong lacing, you get the hiccups for an hour and everyone pretends not to notice. You are, of course, still under surveillance. You've learned to ignore the constant presence of eyes, the guards near every threshold, the ladies pretending not to watch you as you kneel at chapel, the servants who definitely aren't cleaning anything but always seem to be in the room. Privacy is not a luxury you have, or will ever have again. Even the walls feel like they're listening. Somewhere in the castle, adults are still debating what language to teach you first. Latin for the church, French for diplomacy, or maybe even a little Italian, just in case your marriage prospects tilt south. Your tutors have strong opinions. You just want to read fairy tales. Instead, you're drilled on proverbs and psalms until you can recite them while balancing a book on your head. You're taught to translate words like piety, virtue, and obedience long before you ever learn freedom. At meals, you sit still as a statue, surrounded by people twice your size who talk about things you only half understand. Grain tithes, treaties, heresies, the Duke of Something's recent gout attack. You're not allowed to interrupt. You're allowed to smile sweetly and say, "Thank you," when someone passes you the roasted turnips. It's like being trapped inside a dinner theatre where no one told you your role, but everyone still critiques your performance. Still, you find small joys. You like the embroidery lessons best, not because you're particularly good at it, but because it means you can sit quietly for long stretches and eavesdrop. The older girls gossip while stitching, sharing whispers about who's betrothed to whom, which lady wears perfume from the east, and who might be sneaking into the stables after sunset. You file it all away. Information is power, even if you're not supposed to wield it yet. Let's not skip the weird stuff, though. You've probably been subjected to at least one medical procedure by now. Maybe cupping, maybe bloodletting, definitely some kind of herbal tonic that tastes like dirt and regret. You've learned not to resist. If you say no, someone quotes scripture about obedience. Or worse, they say you're acting common. You sit still and let them poke, prod and paw whatever they think will strengthen your constitution. And when it's over, you get a candied almond and the privilege of not being scolded. Here's a quirky, less than pleasant historical truth. Many noble households had test meals prepared for royal children. A food taster, usually a servant of unfortunate rank, would eat a bite of your supper first just in case. Someone slipped in a little something deadly. Poison was always a looming fear, especially in courts with, shall we say, ambitious cousins. So while you nibble your honey cake and sip wine water from a pewter goblet, someone across the room is actively gambling with their intestines for your safety. Sweet dreams. Court gossip shifts once you start to lose your milk teeth. People start referring to you as a young lady, not a child. No one asks you what you think about that. They just expect you to behave like someone who knows the price of her own skin. You don't, not yet. But you're beginning to understand the game. You start to speak more carefully. You notice who gets what they want and how they ask for it. You observe who smiles and who shows their teeth. You try both and see which gets better results. There's a moment, midwinter maybe, when you're brought to a banquet and seated higher up than usual. You're close to your father, whose robes are lined in wolf fur, and he smells like cloves and steel. He doesn't look at you often, but when he does, it's with the same cool calculation he gives to maps. You wonder if he sees you, or just the treaties you'll be traded for. You don't cry, not here, not in front of all the lords and ladies watching you chew a pigeon leg with perfect etiquette. And here's something historians debate endlessly. Did medieval princesses feel royal in childhood? Did they internalise their status, or did they see themselves as little girls playing a role that slowly became real? Some argue that noble children were as steeped in their roles as fish in water, never questioning the structure. Others believe that children, especially girls, struggled against invisible walls, feeling the shape of the trap long before they had words to describe it. You just know the walls are too high to climb and the windows don't open wide enough to crawl through. At night, you still dream of running barefoot down the forbidden corridor. Sometimes you dream of forests and cloaks, of hiding your name and becoming someone else entirely. In the morning you wake up with your name stitched into your collar and a schedule laid out on parchment. You don't speak of the dreams, no one would understand. But you keep walking that line, small, precise, deliberate, between obedience and observation. You're not free, but you're learning. You're 8 now, maybe edging into 9, and there's something different in the air around you. An extra layer of pressure, like a velvet curtain drawn too tight around the edges of your world. You're still very much a child, but people have stopped treating you like one. Your dresses are longer, your titles are longer. The silences between people when they say your name, also longer. Everything is being stretched, except your freedom, which continues to shrink by the day. This is when you first hear the word expectations, in a tone that makes your stomach squirm. Not just once, but constantly. Expectations of your behaviour, your posture, your patience. Expectations of your knowledge of family history. Why it matters that your grandmother was once regent during a war, or how your cousin's marriage secured a port no one wants to explain to you. You're expected to understand that you're not just a girl, but a symbol, a carefully woven thread in a tapestry that's already older than you, and will keep growing long after you're gone. And because expectations are now fully in play, you're handed some of the most absurd toys imaginable. Tiny model castles made from ivory, a loot your fingers can barely stretch across, and dolls dressed like queens. But these dolls are different from the comforting cloth ones you had as a toddler. These ones come with miniature dowries, tiny chests full of fake jewels and fabric swatches. It's not play, it's training. Every game is preparing you to be someone's prize. Of course, there's the etiquette. Your life is now one long, grueling lesson in how not to make anyone else uncomfortable. You're taught to curtsy so deeply your knees creak. You practice how to enter a room and pause just long enough for everyone to notice your presence without appearing to demand attention. If your sleeves drag too low, if your laugh is too loud, or if you forget to stand when a bishop enters the room, you're corrected. Gently at first, then not so gently. Because a princess should never draw attention to her flaws. She should glide through the world like a breeze in a rose garden, soft, fragrant, and utterly forgettable unless someone's ready to pick her. You're also learning to entertain. That means dancing, or at least pretending to enjoy dancing while your governess claps off beat and makes you repeat the same bow 3 times because your angle lacks reverence. You also learn to play a few courtly songs on the harp, well enough to impress a visiting lord, not well enough to be taken seriously. Heaven forbid a royal girl is taken too seriously in any artistic capacity. You're here to charm, not outshine, perform, not create. You're introduced to what the court calls light diplomacy, which is a fancy way of saying you need to be sweet to people you dislike, especially children of other nobles. You're placed beside them at feasts. You're told to admire their gowns. You trade compliments like currency. Your curls are like spun gold. Your voice is sweeter than a lark's. You're also taught to deflect. If someone insults you, you smile and change the subject. If someone says your house is weak or your father is aging, you laugh softly and say, "God grants wisdom with years." Every sentence you speak is armour. Let's talk tutors. You now have more than one. There's the language tutor who drones on about syntax while gesturing dramatically at conjugations. There's the scripture tutor who smells like candle wax and insists you memorize long stretches of psalms in Latin. And then there's the manners tutor, who always seems vaguely disappointed in your existence. He watches you sip from a goblet and says things like, "No, no." A princess tilts the cup as if it's the Holy Grail. Gently, reverently. You wonder what would happen if you hurled it across the room. Probably nothing good. Of course, your education now includes your value, and by value, they mean your dowry. It's spoken of like a weather pattern. This looming thing no one can control but everyone prepares for. You hear numbers thrown around in whispers. How many acres of land? How many tapestries? How much silver? You're not part of these conversations, technically, but they still happen near enough that you can hear your name paired with terms like negotiation, bargaining power, and future yield. You're 8. You're still scared of thunder, but apparently you're also worth 3 castles and half a forest. A particularly bizarre fringe practice in some medieval courts involved dowry dolls, tiny wooden figures dressed in miniature wedding garments, each representing an element of your marriage prospects. You're given one. It has a painted face and an unsettling smile. Your governess says it represents your future. You bury it under a pillow and pretend you forgot where it went. Now for a real, ongoing historical debate. How early were royal girls truly involved in these courtship arrangements? Some scholars believe young princesses were kept blissfully unaware until marriage negotiations reached the final stages. Others argue that girls were gradually and deliberately groomed to accept their role as living treaties. They point to letters, portraits, and court records where very young girls were introduced to their future husbands during festive visits. The truth is probably both. Awareness arrived in waves, never all at once and never gently. Meanwhile, the palace dogs love you. They're not impressed by titles or etiquette. They bark, leap, and slobber, treating you like a gloriously undersupervised playmate. You sneak food to them beneath the table. They lick your hands in return. Your governess disapproves, of course. Dogs are messy and unseemly, but they don't care if your elbows are tucked or your Latin is wrong. They're the only creatures in the castle who see you for what you are, a child. There's a moment when you're walking through the castle garden, hand tucked in a silk muff to ward off the cold, when you see a servant girl laughing with her brother. They're filthy, playing in a puddle, and you envy them so hard your chest aches. For 1 second, you think about running into the mud, laughing too just to feel something that isn't rehearsed, but you don't. You keep walking because someone's always watching, and a princess doesn't play in puddles. A princess is the person people bow to, not the person who makes a splash. At night you lie in bed beneath a heavy canopy, half listening to the wind howl through the courtyard. You replay the day, every curtsy, every phrase you repeated like a charm, every moment you smiled when you wanted to scream. You whisper your name again, this time into the darkness, not for comfort but as a reminder. You are her, the one they keep preparing for something. You don't know what yet, but it's coming. You can feel it. Now you're 10, and everything is starting to feel sharper. The days are longer, the air a little colder, the smiles a little more forced. You're still small, still tucked into corners of the great hall during formal audiences, but you're no longer invisible. People notice you, how you move, how you speak, how quickly you pick things up. They don't say it directly, but it's clear. The bar has been raised. You're not just expected to behave now, you're expected to perform. And so enters your first real tutor. Not the gentle, distracted monks from before who let you trace letters with ink-stained fingers while they muttered prayers under their breath. This one is different. He arrives in a stiff black robe that makes a sound like whispering parchment every time he turns. His name is Master Godfrey, and you instantly hate how much he doesn't smile. His first lesson is brutal. He asks you to recite the Lord's Prayer in Latin, then critiques your pronunciation as though you're giving a papal speech. Then he makes you do it again, and again, until your throat stings and your ears are hot. This is your life now. Mornings begin with scripture, Latin declensions, and the ever-frustrating art of handwriting. You're made to sit with your back straight as a lance while copying lines about moral virtue. Every mistake earns a tap, not hard but hard enough, on your knuckles with the edge of a wooden rod. Precision, Master Godfrey says, is the root of discipline. You'd rather he root himself off the battlements, and it's not just Latin. You're learning courtly history, the genealogies of not only your own house, but those of surrounding kingdoms. You're expected to remember who married whom 3 generations ago, which duchess founded a convent, which lord rebelled and lost a thumb. This is the trivia of diplomacy, and you're fed it like porridge, bland but unavoidable. Outside of lessons, there are rehearsals. Yes, rehearsals. You're now coached in how to sit at banquets, how to rise when addressed by nobles, how to deliver greetings in multiple languages. You've learned the exact tilt of the head for every social rank, chin up for lords, down for priests, neutral for visiting emissaries. You've been taught how to walk slowly enough to appear graceful, but quickly enough not to be accused of vanity. Sometimes it feels like the castle is just one endless stage, and you're the reluctant lead in a show you never auditioned for. Meanwhile, the real world of adults continues around you, like a whispered storm. You hear arguments through stone walls, catch glimpses of furious faces behind silk curtains. The realm is never fully at peace, and while you're not privy to the details, you know enough to sense the tension. Taxes, land disputes, rumours of war, these hang over everything like winter fog. Your father's counsel meets more often, your mother prays longer, and you're being taught how to smile through it all. But there are moments, tiny fractures in the formality, where your real self escapes. One afternoon, you're led to the gardens to take in fresh air and natural beauty, which really means walking in circles under surveillance. You slip away briefly to a corner where the ivy grows thick and curling. Beneath it, you find a beetle with a metallic green shell and watch it crawl across your sleeve. It doesn't care who you are, it just wants to be warm. You keep it there for a few minutes before a maid notices and shoos it away with a nervous glance, whispering about unclean creatures. You miss the beetle for days afterward. You're also starting to grasp the unspoken ranking system of your household. It's not just about titles, it's about presence. The way your father's steward speaks louder than the visiting baron. The way your mother's lady-in-waiting can reduce other women to silence with a single glance. There are rules beneath the rules, and you're just beginning to read them. You test things. You offer small comments in Latin during supper. You ask your tutor about a foreign princess who escaped her arranged marriage by hiding in a convent. These experiments are met with raised brows, sometimes a sigh, but occasionally, just occasionally, someone smiles. a tiny sign that you're learning to walk the tightrope. Let's pause for a particularly weird fact. Some royal households used animals as educational tools. A particularly docile falcon might be shown to you, not to teach hunting, you're not allowed to actually do that, but to observe the discipline of nature. There's a belief that watching noble beasts reinforces noble behaviour. You spend an entire afternoon trying to imitate the falcon's stare in a polished piece of bronze. You're not sure it worked, but it made the steward flinch, so that's something. There's also the matter of your voice. You're taught to project it clearly, but never too loudly. Laughter should be melodic, not raucous. Screaming is for peasants and pigs. Your voice must be tuned like a lute. Delicate, practiced, restrained. You hate this lesson more than any other. You already know your voice isn't your own. It belongs to whatever version of you they're trying to build. Meanwhile, your bedtime stories are changing. No more talking animals or mischievous fairies. Now it's tales of noble women sacrificing for their kingdoms, of queens who endure cruel husbands with saintly grace, of girls who go willingly into cloisters or across oceans, to foreign courts. These are meant to inspire you. But all you feel is a quiet panic. Is this the path? Is that your ending? Your governess says yes, though not directly. Every lady, she tells you one night as she braids your hair, must one day serve her house, whether through marriage, motherhood, or the veil. You ask what she means by the veil. She says, "A nunnery, my lady." You stare at her hands, watch them work the braid. You don't ask more questions. Now here's the scholarly divide. Some historians argue that girls in your position had a measure of agency. Small decisions, influence through relationships, chances to guide their fate subtly. Others say it was all illusion, that your fate was decided the moment you drew breath, and the rest was a long, exquisitely polite parade toward inevitability. They both might be right. You feel it shift daily. Sometimes you sense the door to freedom slightly ajar. Other times it's slammed shut before you can even imagine walking through. At night, lying beneath your canopy, you review your lessons. The Latin phrases, the curtsy angles, the names of long-dead queens who did what they were told. But then your mind slips, just for a moment, into the fantasy of riding a horse without a side saddle, galloping into a field without anyone calling your name. You never speak of this, but it comes back, night after night. And each morning you rise with the sun and step once more into the girl they expect you to be. By the time you're 11, your days are stitched together like embroidery, tight, precise, and utterly inescapable. The morning bell rings and you're already upright before your maid enters, because being caught asleep is now considered a personal failing. You're dressed in layer after layer of woven expectations, from your embroidered undergown to your surcoat laced so tightly you swear you've forgotten how to breathe properly. Everyone says you look beautiful, which you've figured out is just code for compliant and tidy. But while your clothes have grown heavier, your childhood has grown thinner. You can feel it slipping. That sense of casual wonder, of freedom to laugh too loud or chase birds in the courtyard, has been scrubbed clean from your routine. Now when you pass the aviary, you don't even look up. You just nod slightly, as if to say, yes, yes, birds exist, now let's move on. At the centre of your new daily routine is the dowry. Not the literal chest of coins and land grants, though that's probably being negotiated as you read this, but the education of what it means. You're not just being trained in the mechanics of being a wife, you're being taught your market value. In hushed conversations between your mother and her advisors, you hear your name paired with regions you've never visited. Brittany, Aragon, Savoy. You imagine them as shapes on a map coloured in soft pastels, far enough away that you can pretend none of this is real. Your governess has started to introduce you to dowry arithmetic. It's not math the way your tutor teaches you with sums and counters. This is subtler. "This necklace," she says one afternoon, holding up a string of pearls, "would not be part of your dowry. It would be part of your gifts, what your husband receives on the wedding day." She touches your wrist. "But this bracelet, that would be part of your price." Price. She says it so softly, like a feather floating down onto a coffin. But the weight hits just the same. The worst part is the pretending. No one says, "You're being sold." They say, "You're being placed, you're being positioned, you're securing your house's future." You're told over and over how lucky you are, that some girls don't have choices, that some girls marry farmers or bakers, that some girls have to cook their own food. You don't know what a baker does exactly, but you imagine it involves flour and fewer rules. It sounds magnificent. One day, during your embroidery lesson, the talk turns to childbearing. You drop your hoop. Your governess sighs as though you've spilled ink on scripture. It is not improper, she says, to prepare a young lady for her duty. Then she proceeds to describe with far too much confidence and far too little detail the miracle of bringing forth heirs. You sit there in silence, unsure if you feel more afraid or just confused. The maid beside you stitches silently, her needle flashing like a dagger. Here's a wonderfully strange historical detail. Some noble families would send you a tiny betrothal gift. It might be a carved box with sweetmeats, a length of foreign silk, or a miniature painted icon of the suitor's patron saint. You receive your first one shortly before your 12th birthday, a gold ring shaped like a serpent biting its own tail. It's from the Duke of Something, your lady-in-waiting says with a hushed grin. He's 3 years older than you, a strong boy, very pious. You try the ring on, then take it off and hide it under your cushion. The idea of someone thinking about you like that, of choosing you without knowing you, makes your skin feel too tight. Meanwhile, you're still expected to play the part. You join court feasts and sit among noble women, laughing when they laugh, nodding when they discuss things you barely understand. You eat politely, always taking the smallest piece. You pretend to enjoy riddles about virtue and honour, and you've gotten good at pretending. Sometimes even you believe it. And yet, beneath all of this, there's a flicker of rebellion. You start sneaking glances at the castle guards during weapons drills. You notice the way they hold their swords, how they move in formations, like choreography with stakes. You start to imagine yourself in armour, not the ceremonial kind embroidered on your family crest, but real armour. Cold, heavy, useful. You imagine your voice not soft and sweet, but sharp, ringing out over a battlefield. Then your embroidery needle slips and pierces your thumb. You're jolted back to the present, to the blood that wells at your cuticle, and the sharp scolding that follows. A princess should never bleed where someone might see. Let's dip into a real scholarly dispute here. How aware were medieval princesses of their own sexual commodification at this age? Some argue that they were too sheltered, too insulated by etiquette and religious instruction to understand the implications. Others believe that royal girls, especially in courts with high turnover from war and politics, had a frighteningly clear grasp on the mechanics of marriage and inheritance. The truth, as always, is messy. And for you, you understand just enough to feel the edges of the trap. One day, you find an old book hidden behind a stack of hymnals in the chapel library. It's not a book for children. It's filled with stories of ancient queens and warriors, some real, some not. A woman who led armies into battle wearing a crown, another who refused to marry and instead ruled alone until her dying breath. You read until your fingers ache from turning the pages. It's the first thing you've done in months that no one told you to do. That night, you dream of riding alone across a plain, wind in your hair, sword at your hip. You wake with a smile. It fades by breakfast. Meanwhile, in the great hall, the men are discussing land taxes. Again. You sit nearby, chewing a piece of bread so slowly it becomes a paste in your mouth. A visiting lord glances at you, then turns to your father. She grows fast, he says. She'll be a fine match. You want to scream. Instead, you fold your hands and say, "Thank you, my lord," because that's what you've been trained to say. You are the dowry, the match, the future footnote in someone else's history. But here's the thing they don't expect. You're also watching, learning, listening. They think you're silent because you're meek, but you're silent because you're collecting data. You know who favours which wine, which servant hides behind the curtain during meetings, which guest likes to talk too much when he's drunk. You're not just a girl in silk, you're a sponge in pearls. The wind howls again that night. You lie in bed, tracing the ring under your pillow, wondering what it would feel like to melt it down and turn it into something else. A pin, maybe, or a key. Anything but a symbol of what you're expected to become. And tomorrow you'll rise, you'll smile, you'll curtsy, you'll add another perfect stitch to your tapestry of obedience. But inside, you sharpen. You're 12 now, and suddenly the world looks at you differently. Like something has shifted, not just in your body, but in how everyone reacts when you enter a room. You've always been watched, but now the gaze has teeth. Conversations pause mid-sentence. Older women narrow their eyes, silently measuring your hips and your manners in the same glance. Men nod respectfully, but their eyes linger too long. The invisible curtain between girlhood and womanhood is starting to rise, and no one asks if you're ready for what's on the other side. Your governess now refers to you as a young lady in every sentence. She corrects your posture with more urgency, adjusts your veil with the same energy a knight might polish his armour before a tournament. She starts sentences with, "When you're married," as if it's a foregone conclusion. You smile, you nod. You wonder what would happen if you just said no, out loud, in front of everyone. Probably nothing good. Your education changes. Latin lessons are joined by French courtly speech, designed for flattery and flinching diplomacy. You're taught to speak in careful pleasantries, to fill silences with appropriate scripture, and to say just enough to seem charming, but never too clever. Being clever is dangerous. Clever gets you noticed. Clever gets you labelled. The subjects change too. You're being trained in estate management now. How to oversee servants, how to manage linen inventories, how to command without raising your voice. You're told a proper lady knows how many candles are burned in a household, but doesn't comment on it unless asked. Your notes are neat. Your mind is sharper than ever. But your mouth stays quiet. Always quiet. One day you ask a dangerous question. Why must women marry? Your tutor, an older man with a moustache that looks like it belongs on a broom, blinks at you. Because it is God's design, he says, the purpose of your birth. Through marriage, peace is brokered, families are united, wars are prevented. He says this like it's noble, like it's poetry. But to you it sounds like the tightening of a noose. Meanwhile, your body is betraying you. You've started to bleed, and though you're not entirely sure how your uterus fits into the church's vision of order and cleanliness, the arrival of your first period is treated like a full-blown event. A chambermaid discovers the stains and immediately alerts the ladies. Within the hour, you're bathed, anointed with rose oil, and given a sash embroidered with a cross to wear under your gown as protection. You're congratulated. Hugged. One woman weeps with joy. You feel like a calf branded for market. You're told to keep it secret from the men of the court, at least for now. But word always travels. You catch the way a visiting noble looks at you during dinner, like he's already imagining the number of heirs you might bear. You clench your fork tighter than necessary. Here's a grim little historical nugget. In many noble courts, menstruation was not just a sign of fertility. It was the beginning of full marital eligibility. A 12-year-old girl might be legally married the same season she bled for the first time. Not necessarily consummated yet, sometimes that waited until 14 or 15. But the paperwork, the ceremonies, the alliances, all greenlit. You now occupy that uncomfortable limbo where people speak of you like a future investment they can finally cash in on. And so, the marriage talk becomes constant. The Duke of something or other has sent a falcon, a real one. It perches in the courtyard, judging everyone with its glassy stare. He's showing his intent, your governess explains. It's a fine bird. You wonder what it would do if you let it fly loose into the feasting hall. You almost want to try. There's also a tapestry being woven now, one that includes you, literally. A master artist has begun work on a wall-sized image of your family's great lineage. Your father stands at the centre, sword in hand, your mother beside him, veiled and pious, and off to the left, a faint, unfinished shape in golden thread. You. Not as you are, but as you will be. Older, more woman than girl, seated on a throne next to an equally blank-faced husband. You stare at it too long, and someone pulls you away. You still steal moments of solitude. They're rarer now, but sometimes just before dusk you sneak to the old chapel on the edge of the grounds. No one uses it anymore, too damp, too draughty. But it's quiet. You sit among the dust and carved saints, fingers tracing the cracks in the stone. You don't pray, not really. But you whisper your own name, again and again, like a question. There's another scholarly debate worth noting. How much did royal girls know about marriage, in the intimate sense? The truth is murky. Some were kept deliberately naive, fed vague metaphors and church-approved analogies involving vineyards and obedience. Others, especially in more worldly courts, were bluntly educated by older female relatives who whispered warnings into the dark. You've heard enough fragments to put together the general idea, and it terrifies you, because suddenly people want your opinion, but only in the most limited sense. You're asked whether you like roses or lilies, whether you prefer blue velvet or green brocade. You're asked if the Duke's falcon is handsome. No one asks what you want to be, because they already know. A bride, a vessel, a figurehead in a gown you didn't choose, standing beside a man you don't know, smiling for a peace treaty you had no hand in crafting. You begin to write poetry. Bad poetry at first, rhyming couplets about rain and birds, but over time it becomes sharper, stranger. You hide it beneath your mattress, tucked between folded linen. One day, a maid finds it. She says nothing. But 2 days later, your parchment is gone, and so are your ink and quills. Your governess tells you writing too much is unsuitable for a girl on the brink of marriage, as if knowledge might infect your womb. Still, you keep the verses in your head. You recite them while kneeling at prayers, your lips moving to different rhythms than the rest of the room. It's a quiet rebellion, but it's yours. The night before your 13th birthday, your mother visits your chamber. She sits beside you, smoothing your blanket, looking at you with eyes that seem older than the stars. You'll be sent away soon, she says. Just like that. No prelude, no comfort. Be kind, be patient, learn what pleases him. She means your future husband, whoever he ends up being. Then she takes a ring from her own hand and presses it into your palm. For strength, she says. You don't cry until she leaves. You don't want her to see how scared you are. You lie in the dark with that ring clutched so tightly it leaves a crescent-shaped mark in your skin. You think of the falcon. You think of the tapestry. You think of your name being sewn into someone else's household, and you wonder, when does a princess stop being a person? You are 13, and though no one has said the exact words, you know, you are officially on display. The transformation is complete. Your child self has been tucked away behind braided hair and embroidered bodices, and in its place now stands a young woman, or at least the version of one the court wants to believe in. Every part of you has been curated, measured, and made presentable. You're a showroom model of feminine virtue, and your audience is the entire kingdom. There's a new energy in the castle now, an air of tense anticipation, like the quiet before a storm or a wedding procession, or both. You're being observed more than ever. The staff no longer whisper around you, they whisper about you, and they don't even try to be subtle anymore. Every new dress you wear is followed by a ripple of opinions. Every reply you offer at supper becomes a topic of debate between your mother's ladies. One says you sound too proud, another says too meek. You start practicing answers in your head before anyone even asks the questions. A fresh rotation of ladies-in-waiting is assigned to you. Young, unmarried women from noble families with surnames longer than your arm and agendas longer than that. They call you my lady, with a certain strain in their voices, like they're still deciding whether they should admire you or pity you. You aren't friends. You aren't allowed to be. They're competitors dressed as confidants, and you're wise enough to see the shape of it even if you can't name the game. You've reached the age of courtly performance. When visitors come to the palace, envoys, nobles, minor royals from distant cities, you are paraded like a prized jewel. At dinners, you're seated at strategic angles so your profile catches the candlelight just right. During music performances, you nod appreciatively but never too enthusiastically. You're expected to laugh at witticisms you don't understand, and to sing on command if someone hands you a lute. Your voice should be soft, your eyes modest, and your smile fleeting enough to seem mysterious. You're 13, and already a seasoned liar, and behind every interaction, there's a silent weight pressing down. Who is watching you? And what will they say about you when they leave? Your body is no longer yours. It belongs to the rumours, the portraits, the marriage contracts that have begun to swirl like winter winds. Your hair is brushed with oils said to attract favour, and a new physician prescribes tonics to encourage fertility, even though your cycle is barely stabilised. You're told to eat more figs and fewer salted meats. You're told to smile more, to speak less, to never laugh when your teeth are showing. Your mouth is your second veil, one court lady says. You don't even know what that means, but you nod. Here's a particularly strange medieval quirk. In certain courts, you might be taught to craft personal perfumes, distillations of lavender, rosemary, or even crushed pearls, used not only for fragrance but as symbolic signatures. You create one yourself, a faint scent of mint and rosewater, and soon you're told it will be sent with your portrait to prospective suitors. It leaves a memory, your lady-in-waiting tells you. You wonder what memory a bottle can carry. and what happens when that scent is all someone knows of you. Of course, you've now met your first real suitor. Well, met is generous. He arrived with a convoy of pale horses and too many banners, a boy of 15 with a crooked nose and a voice that squeaked when he said, "My lady." You shared a brief walk in the gardens, under full supervision naturally. You talked about the weather. He compared your eyes to moonlight. You compared his hands to bread dough. Not out loud, of course, just in your mind. He smelled like smoked fish and ambition. Later the adults talked in private. You weren't invited, but you know what they discussed. His father owns lands near a border your kingdom would love to secure. Your dowry would double the value of the match. He left with a ring and a sketch of your face. You don't know if you'll ever see him again. Meanwhile, your tutors have changed tone. They no longer teach you like a student. They coach you like an actress. One lesson is entirely focused on what to do if your future husband insults your family. The answer apparently is to smile, change the subject, and then gently assert your house's virtue through poetry or embroidery. You consider stabbing a cushion instead, but that's not ladylike. And then your portrait arrives, the official one, painted by a silent man who stared at you for hours but never met your gaze. When it's unveiled, everyone gasps. It's you, but not really. The cheeks are softer, the eyes more mysterious, the waist unnaturally small. You look like a queen, your mother says, but you feel like someone has made a doll of your future and nailed your name to its forehead. Now comes the truly strange part. The court has started to curate your mood. You're given happy reading only, no tragedies, no tales of doomed lovers or warrior queens. You're advised to spend less time in the chapel because your prayers have grown too intense. You're asked not to walk alone, not even in daylight, because it gives the wrong impression. You're not just being trained anymore, you're being packaged. There's a long-standing debate among historians about how much influence a medieval princess could exert over her own betrothal. In theory, consent was required. In practice, consent was shaped, coaxed, and cornered until it resembled obedience. Stories exist of princesses who rejected suitors. Some were sent to nunneries, others disappeared from the records entirely. A few triumphed, most did not. You know this. It's why your yes is being prepared months before the question is asked. At night, you write letters you never send. To future you, to no one. You describe who you would be if you lived in a world where girls weren't traded for boarders. You imagine your own castle, small and quiet, with a garden where no one watches you. You imagine choosing your own name, not the one your parents gave you, not the one embroidered on every napkin in the Great Hall, but something strange and beautiful and entirely yours. One morning, you wake up to the news that a princess in another kingdom has died in childbirth. She was 15. You don't know her, but you sit very still and press your hand to your stomach like you're trying to keep something in or out. Your maid says nothing. She simply folds the bedsheets tighter, and yet tomorrow you'll wear that new gown they've prepared, the one that makes your shoulders look regal and your waist marketable. You'll practice your curtsy, you'll smile at another foreign emissary, you'll play your part. But deep inside, beneath the perfume and painted grace, you are already planning your escape. You're 14 now, and the mirror doesn't lie anymore. There's no more blurring the edges of who you're becoming. You see it in your face, longer, more defined. You see it in your hands, in the way people pause before speaking to you now, like your presence has somehow solidified, become real. You're no longer just a girl with potential. You're a woman in progress, and your beauty has been upgraded from hopeful to strategic. Which means, of course, it's time to talk about your face. In the Middle Ages, beauty isn't about expression or joy or even health. It's about pale skin that glows like marble, hair that falls like golden wheat, and a forehead high enough to host a chess match. And unfortunately, you're stuck with the face you were born with. So now begins the relentless war against your own features, carried out with powders, pastes, and a total disregard for skin safety. Each morning, your maid applies a chalky white substance, made from ground lead and vinegar, known as ceruse. It cakes slightly at your jawline, but the court calls it divine luminosity. Your cheeks are tinted with crushed rose petals, or, if the alchemist's been lucky that week, a bit of carmine beetle. Your lips get a dab of honey wine paste to redden them. The effect is ethereal. The cost is that your skin constantly itches, and sometimes peels in small, terrifying flakes. Your forehead is plucked. Not your eyebrows, your actual forehead. You see, the current beauty standard says a high forehead is a sign of nobility and intelligence. So your maid takes tiny tweezers and slowly rips out the front line of your hair. It stings. You tear up. No one cares. This is what princesses do. Later you catch a glimpse of yourself in a polished silver mirror and think, I look like a thoughtful egg. Then there's the hair care, or medieval approximation of it. Oily roots, rinse with fermented water. Dandruff, try an onion and vinegar scrub, rubbed in with linen strips. Want shine. Boil rosemary, sage, and a small silver coin, then pour it over your scalp while whispering a psalm. And heaven help you if your hair's too dark. You might be encouraged to sleep with lemon rinds pressed along your hairline, or spend afternoons under the sun in a hat lined with crushed daisy petals to lighten it. And yet, despite all this labour, you're told that true beauty is effortless. You must never appear as though you tried. A noble lady glows from within, your governess says as she rubs your arms with scented oil that smells suspiciously like mutton fat. You smile tightly. From within, you repeat, wondering if within has anything left to give. What's worse is that all of this is less about you and more about the people who are supposed to be attracted to you. The idea of male desire hovers over every beauty routine, every fabric fitting, every subtle adjustment to the way you smile. Your appearance is your power, they tell you, but only if it pleases others, especially one particular other. The suitor who's coming to court next week. Yes, him. You've heard whispers about him for months. He's a prince, or at least related to one. His family is rich in vineyards and conveniently located on the edge of your kingdom's most stubborn border. His visit is framed as a diplomatic courtesy, but everyone knows why he's really coming. To see if you'll do. Cue the preparations. You're given a new gown, fitted so precisely it feels like a second skin made of silk and expectation. You're taught how to lower your eyes without appearing shy, how to let your smile hover at the corners of your mouth, never too wide, never too revealing. You're told not to eat too much during the feast, to avoid staining your fingers and to laugh, but only in the middle of someone else's sentence. Laughter, says your etiquette tutor, should always serve someone else's timing. He arrives, with fanfare and a white horse, because of course he does. He's older than you, 17 or 18, and seems entirely too aware of his own importance. His gaze rests on you like he's inspecting a painting. He says you're beautiful. You say thank you. You do not mention that he smells like a damp manuscript and has the charisma of boiled oats. You're seated beside him at dinner. You eat nothing. You make clever, non-threatening comments. He tells a story about a falcon he once trained, which somehow ends with a digression about how women are like birds, lovely to look at but always trying to escape. You smile politely. You picture your knife going into his thigh. Just a little. Just enough to ruin his breeches. Here's a lesser-known medieval custom. Some nobles believed that a woman's physical glow could reveal her virtue. So after your audience with the suitor, you're escorted to a chamber where a matronly lady watches you remove your veil and evaluates your skin tone. Still fair, she says. Untouched. As though virtue could be measured by paleness alone. And there's a real historical debate buried in all this. How much control did noble women have over their beauty regimens? And did they see these rituals as empowerment or submission? Some argue that women used beauty as their only weapon in male-dominated court politics, weaponizing charm, curating allure, building influence through aesthetics. Others say the standards were so rigid that beauty became just another kind of chain. Either way, you're stuck with the pressure. You wear it like a second crown, invisible but heavier than the real one. Later, after the feast, you're brought into a small solar to sit with the suitor and his mother. It's the unofficial, pre-betrothal vetting moment. You pour tea with the grace of a practiced acolyte. She watches you like a hawk, probably counting your teeth behind her smile. The prince says you remind him of a summer day in Naples. You have never been to Naples. You nod as if you miss it dearly. When it's over, your mother says you did well. She kisses your forehead, the part where your hair's been plucked raw. You say nothing. That night, you're allowed to remove the makeup yourself. You stare at your reflection in a bowl of water, seeing your face float and ripple like it's trying to escape itself. You scrub until your cheeks sting. The smell of rosewater won't leave. Neither will the memory of his voice, or the way the ladies-in-waiting practically purred after he left the room. You lie in bed with your face buried in the pillow, wondering if you'll be sent to his kingdom in the spring. if you'll be married by 15, if he'll ever care about who you are beneath the chalk and crush petals. You already know the answer, but for now you sleep, because tomorrow there's another fitting, another portrait, another round of honey on your lips and poison in your hair. And one day, they say, it will all be worth it. You're 15, and your body doesn't feel like yours anymore. Not because you don't recognise it, but because it's no longer treated like something that belongs to you. It's an investment, an offering, a fragile package the court is carefully wrapping in silks and spices. And it's also a target, because now officially you can bear children. And in the medieval mind, that makes you the most dangerous kind of woman, a fertile one. Your household adjusts its pace. Everyone seems to walk faster around you. Maids don't linger in conversation. Servants bow lower. The air around you has become brittle, like even a sigh might cause some priceless plan to shatter. You've become the centerpiece of a strategy that's nearing its endgame. The alliances are being inked. Your name is moving across maps in red wax and ribbon, and everyone smiles as though you're not supposed to notice. But you do. You notice everything. And right now, you notice something very real. A plague has arrived. It starts small. A merchant's child in the lower town, then a stable boy. Whispers ripple through the halls like candle smoke. They boils, they say, the black marks. You're quickly moved to an upper chamber, one that was last used for storing summer linens but is now deemed safer, farther from the gates. You're not allowed to touch anything you haven't seen someone else scrub. No bread unless it's baked that morning. No visitors who've travelled from afar. Your tutor says, this is only precaution. Your maid won't stop crossing herself. Still, you're not afraid. Not at first. You've heard of plagues. They happen. They come and go like storms. But then someone you know gets it. A lady in waiting who once braided your hair while telling you stories of Venice. You're told she's taken ill and sent away. You never see her again. No one says the word dead, but you understand. The castle begins to empty. Courtiers disappear under vague excuses, returning to their estates, or awaiting letters, or suddenly feeling faint. Tapestries are taken down and washed in wine. Candles are lit during the day to ward off bad airs. And that's when fear finally catches up with you. Because even as the air grows colder and the halls quieter, the political machine doesn't stop turning. Your betrothal is still in motion. There's a planned envoy coming from your suitor's house, a procession of advisors and priests meant to finalise terms and inspect the castle chapel. But with the plague spreading, the court faces a dilemma: postpone and risk losing favour, or proceed and risk death. Naturally, they proceed. So now your court has a new kind of tension, one that mixes pestilence with pageantry. You're instructed to greet the visitors wearing a veil, not for modesty, but as a barrier. You're told not to kiss hands, not to eat at the banquet, not to lean too close. You practice smiling. With your eyes, your governess insists that even through fabric a princess should radiate warmth. It's hard to radiate anything when you're holding your breath. The visitors arrive in masks and gloves, bringing gifts wrapped in cloth soaked with vinegar. They bow low and speak quickly. Their leader, a bishop with a crooked spine and a voice like grinding pepper, announces that the marriage will proceed in good faith, but suggests that the actual wedding might be delayed, in light of God's cleansing work among the people. You smile behind your veil and think, God's cleansing work has very poor timing. Then one of your kitchen staff collapses during supper service. Not in front of the nobles, of course. He was halfway between the scullery and the hallway. But someone saw, and someone else whispered, and now you're being moved again. This time to the old guest tower, the one that smells like forgotten beeswax and cold stone. You're not alone. Your maid is with you, along with a young novice from the abbey who's been assigned to recite psalms each morning. Her voice shakes every time she mentions pestilence. She's 16. You try to act brave for her. You hold your breath as incense is burned around the doorframe. You say the prayers with her, even though you're beginning to resent the endless rhythm of them. Here's a little-known medieval belief that might make you pause. Many people thought illness was drawn to certain moods, that melancholy invited disease, and joy could repel it. So your caretakers begin urging you to laugh more, to smile at birds outside the window, to think happy thoughts, as though bubonic plague can be countered with a good attitude and some indoor sunshine. You try, you fail, you try again. There's a scholarly debate about how high-born girls like you were treated during outbreaks. Some historians argue that royal women were fiercely protected, moved away to country estates, sealed off from infection at any cost. Others say that political obligations often kept them in harm's way, especially if a marriage or alliance was on the line. After all, you can't pause diplomacy because of a few blackened corpses. Your experience suggests the latter. You've been isolated, but not removed. Protected, but not at the cost of a signature. And just when things seem like they can't grow more grim, you fall ill. It begins with a headache, not a pounding one, just a dull ache that lingers. Then you feel the chill, then the burning, a fever that settles into your bones and wraps itself around your chest like an iron corset. The maid notices you're not speaking much. She touches your forehead. Her face goes pale. The next morning a priest arrives. Quietly. You're not told why, but you can guess. He asks if you want to confess. You do. You confess to hiding food under your bed, to reading books not meant for you, to pretending to faint during one embroidery lesson just to be left alone, to wishing, just once, that your suitor would fall off his horse and break a leg. You say all of this with your eyes closed, your voice thin and drifting. When you wake again, the fever has broken. Your maid cries. The priest thanks God. The novice sings a hymn so off-key it sounds like a curse. You survive. Not everyone does. When you finally return to your usual chamber, you do so in silence. Half the castle feels gone. The faces have changed. The air still smells of vinegar and wet wool. You've lost weight. Your reflection looks haunted. But your betrothal still stands. Because in the end, you're still the same thing they've always seen. A princess. And the world doesn't wait for princesses to heal. You're 16 now, and the court has returned to its usual rhythm. Less because the world is truly safe, and more because everyone has grown tired of being afraid. The plague has receded for now, leaving behind the smell of vinegar in the halls and a few too many empty chairs at dinner. But the banners are flying again. The feasts have resumed, and so has the carefully choreographed theatre of royal life. And you, of course, are front and centre. You're no longer the girl everyone's whispering about. Now you're the young woman they admire in measured tones, with narrowed eyes and tight smiles. There's an edge to everything. You feel it in the compliments. Your grace has ripened well, and in the glances you get when you walk into a room, as though everyone is waiting for you to either dazzle or ruin everything. At this age, you've passed the threshold. You're no longer training for court life. You're living it. Or surviving it, depending on the hour. The feasts are constant now, each one more theatrical than the last. At first, they felt like reward. Music, roasted pheasant, jesters juggling flaming pins. But now, they feel like tests. You're seated between men twice your age, expected to sip wine delicately, laugh without showing teeth, and offer clever observations without implying you have opinions. You're also expected to eat very little, but not so little that people think you're unwell. Everything has an unspoken rule. Everything is scored. Even the way you move is under scrutiny. One wrong glance toward the wrong noble, and you'll spark a week of gossip. One too long pause before toasting your suitor, and you'll trigger another midnight talk with your mother about presentation. That word, it haunts you. No one says, be honest. They say, present well. No one says, be yourself. They say, be what they expect. Court life is equal parts glitter and venom. There's beauty, yes. Harpists playing love ballads as you walk through the gallery, peacocks preening on the parapets, jewels heavy enough to bruise your collarbone. But beneath the beauty, there are traps. Rival ladies-in-waiting who smirk too wide. Courtiers who ask harmless questions like, do you long for home? Or, have you begun packing for the journey yet? They're not really curious. They're testing your loyalty, your readiness, your place in the hierarchy. Every question is a chess move, every answer a gamble. One evening, you overhear two noblewomen debating your likability while pretending to discuss flower arrangements. One says she has her mother's bearing, the other says yes, but not her mother's warmth. You're 5 steps away. They know you can hear. You smile anyway. And here's the twist. You've gotten good at smiling. You've become fluent in the language of court survival. You know how to nod with calculated reverence when someone insults you indirectly. You know how to change the subject without seeming evasive. You've memorized enough scripture to quote it at will, which gives you cover when you need to exit a conversation under the veil of holiness. You've mastered the difference between a graceful silence and a dangerous one, and above all, you've learned when to say nothing at all. There's a particularly strange quirk about your current position. People constantly assume you know everything that's going on. Because you're royal, because you're present, because you're a girl who's been trained to listen. So they speak in code around you, drop hints, imply scandal, and then act shocked when you don't confirm or deny. It becomes a game. People testing what you know, you pretending you don't, and occasionally slipping in a well-placed observation that leaves everyone stunned. You start to enjoy that. There's a running scholarly debate about whether princesses like you had real agency at court, or whether the poise and performance were purely superficial, tools used by others. Some say noble women wielded quiet influence, shaping policies through pillow talk and prayer circles. Others argue that most royal girls were stage props with very expensive dresses. The truth is probably something in between. Influence that's real, but delicate. Breakable. Always at risk of being revoked if you step out of line. Meanwhile, the suitor is back. Not officially. He's here to observe a regional tournament, but no one's fooled. He stays in the guest tower with his retinue and his massive, needlessly embroidered standard, bearing a swan with far too many feathers. You are, of course, invited to watch the tournament, which means another gown, another veil, another performance. You sit high in the viewing stand, surrounded by ladies and squires, and so much perfume it feels like you're breathing through a garden. Your suitor wins a joust. Everyone cheers. He turns toward your box and raises his lance in salute. You're expected to blush. You practice a dignified version. It works. The crowd sighs. You feel like vomiting. That night there's a banquet in his honour. He sits beside you, talks about the armour he designed himself, brags about his hunting dogs, says he looks forward to seeing you in his garden someday. Your mother beams across the table. You cut your meat in perfect slices and smile until your cheeks ache. And later, when you're finally alone in your chamber, you cry so quietly that even the maid laying out your nightgown pretends not to notice. Here's a weird and deeply medieval superstition for you. Some noble women carried tiny carved figurines of saints in their sleeves to protect them from unwanted attention. You've been given one too, St. Agnes, patron of purity. She's tiny, wooden, chipped. You hold her between your fingers sometimes during feasts, when the air gets too heavy and the room starts to spin with expectation. You like to imagine her rolling her tiny carved eyes at everyone. One morning you wake to find your name written into the official records of the court betrothal calendar. It's done. The engagement has been formalised. You are no longer a potential bride. You are the bride-to-be. There's a gold script notice on the chapel door. There's a song sung by the court minstrels. There's a new dress, ivory this time, being stitched in a frenzy of lace and pearls. The wedding is in 4 months. You don't feel anything at first, just numbness. The kind that makes even joy feel like a performance. Everyone congratulates you. You nod. You pretend to look overwhelmed with happiness. You say all the right things, but inside there's only this low, cold certainty. This is the last season of your life you'll ever spend in this castle, in this version of yourself. You sit alone in the chapel that night, beside a candle that flickers wildly in the draught. You whisper to no one in particular, "Is this it?" The walls say nothing. The stone saints look unimpressed. And tomorrow you'll rise. You'll meet the seamstresses. You'll taste the cakes. You'll walk through the garden with the boy who will become your husband. You'll be perfect, even if it kills you. You're 17 now, and someone has decided it's time for your face to last forever. A portrait. Not the sweet little miniature sent with your first ring, or the vague oil sketch from your early teens that made you look like a wistful potato. No, this one is the official portrait, commissioned by both your family and his, destined to hang in a hall you've never visited, in a house you've never stepped foot in, a symbol of your blooming womanhood and your ever so gentle surrender into marital duty. Congratulations. The artist arrives with a cartload of paints, strange brushes made of pig hair, and an assistant who carries everything except his pride. He says very little when you meet, just bows, squints at your face and says, "She'll do." It's unclear whether that's a compliment or a death sentence. From that moment on, you are no longer a person. You are a subject, a collection of features to be preserved in oil and gold leaf. The sitting room is cold, too cold. You're instructed not to shiver, not to squint. And for the love of God, not to look bored. Think of your marriage, your mother says from the corner, like that's supposed to warm your heart. You sit stiffly on a carved oak chair, hands folded in your lap, while the painter circles you like a crow. They've chosen your gown for you. Ivory with pearl trimming, a tight bodice and long sleeves that trail off into sheer lace. Your hair has been curled and pinned and brushed until it defies all known laws of nature. Your jewellery is symbolic. Your mother's ring, your family's crest in a small brooch near your shoulder, and a velvet ribbon around your neck to signify grace. You feel like a mannequin, a very expensive, very itchy mannequin. The artist doesn't speak to you unless absolutely necessary. He mutters things under his breath, about light, about angles, about how this girl's neck isn't cooperating. You try not to react, but you also quietly begin inventing whole backstories for him. You decide he once fell in love with a noblewoman who broke his heart by marrying her cousin, and now he takes revenge by painting everyone to look slightly more tragic than they are. And indeed, as the days go by, you begin to see the painting take shape. It's you, but not you. Your cheeks are smoother, your chin more delicate, your eyes rounder, darker, more wistful. The artist doesn't just capture your face, he reinterprets it. He sculpts you into a dream you were never consulted on. Your suitor's family sends word they are pleased. Of course they are. You look like a prayer they could marry into. Pure, graceful, and, crucially, silent. And here's where things get particularly interesting. In many courts, artists deliberately altered their royal subjects. A narrower nose, paler skin, a softer mouth. These weren't lies. They were expectations. Visual diplomacy. You weren't just being painted, you were being prepared for public consumption. The final portrait wasn't meant to reflect who you were. It was meant to reflect who your new family wanted to believe they were marrying. Your mother once had a portrait painted too. It hangs in the long gallery, quiet, regal, her eyes fixed in some eternal expression of calm you now realise was probably just tightly concealed exhaustion. You ask her if she liked sitting for it. She laughs, not kindly. "Like it," she says. "My dear, I had just miscarried twins." Then she adjusts your veil and changes the subject. You start noticing all the portraits now. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, lining the stone corridors of the castle. Dead queens. Almost queens. Forgotten daughters. Some of them look nothing like their recorded descriptions. Some wear expressions so blank they seem ghostly. You wonder how many of them hated the dresses they wore. How many were pregnant during their sittings. How many sat there thinking about someone they loved, and were not, allowed to marry. You learn from a maid that sometimes when a royal woman died young, say in childbirth, they reused her portrait. Touched it up, repainted the gown, maybe changed the crest. No one wanted to waste the expense, so even the dead got edited. Immortality on canvas, with the help of a few brushstrokes and some strategic forgetfulness. There's a quiet debate among historians about whether medieval portraits offered any true insight into the personalities of their subjects. Some argue that details in the eyes, the posture, the tilt of the hands suggest inner thoughts, clues for the observant. Others believe they're pure propaganda, more reflective of a family's ambition than the woman's soul. Looking at your own portrait, you're inclined to believe both are true. It's a fiction, yes, but one made from pieces of you that are very, very real. You're now required to sit for small versions as well. Miniatures that will be sent to other courts in case the marriage breaks down and you're back on the market like an over-polished heirloom. You pose, you smile, you hold still for so long your arm goes numb. You joke with your maid that they should just carve you out of marble and be done with it. She doesn't laugh, and now the real fun begins. People start responding to the painting instead of to you. You hear things like, "She's more radiant in person," or "I expected her eyes to be darker." One nobleman even bows and says, "My lady, you look exactly as you do in your portrait." You smile and respond, "Then I must thank the artist for inventing me." You spend more and more time in the gallery looking at yourself. Well, the version of you captured in oil and varnish. You wonder if it will outlive you. If, hundreds of years from now, someone will look at it and invent a whole life for you that bears no resemblance to the one you actually lived. Maybe they'll say you were happy. Maybe they'll say you ruled wisely. Maybe they'll say you died in peace. You almost laugh. That version of you sounds quite lucky. Then one morning, just before breakfast, your younger cousin, who's still in that blissful, unpainted stage of her life, tugs on your sleeve and asks, "Why are you always in that picture room?" You look down at her, smile softly and say, "Because it's the only place I know where no one expects me to speak." There's one final sitting. The artist adjusts the light. Your dress rustles. Your hands fold neatly. And for just a moment, just one, you stop thinking about the wedding, the suitor, the weight of what's coming. You think about the future, not the one you're being painted into, the one where no one remembers your name, but maybe remembers how fiercely you wanted your life to be more than a face in a frame. The brushstrokes settle, the varnish dries, and your image is sealed. You're 18, and everything you've been prepared for is finally, definitively, happening. Your betrothal has entered the phase of no return. Contracts are signed, dowries counted, blessings issued. There are no more polite delays, no more conveniently timed outbreaks or family illnesses or courtly distractions to stall the inevitable. The date is chosen. The bells have been polished. You are, in the words of everyone around you, ready. You don't feel ready. But readiness isn't required, just obedience, and a certain grace under pressure that can be mistaken for joy if your chin is angled correctly. Every day now is a ceremony in miniature. You wake to songs instead of bells. Servants pour rosewater over your hands and whisper blessings as if each one can make this easier. Meals are dainty, meant to preserve your glow. You're no longer fed, you're curated. There's someone constantly fussing over your posture, the lines of your sleeves, the brightness of your eyes. A priest visits daily to remind you of the holiness of the union. Your mother visits to remind you not to embarrass anyone. Your bridal wardrobe is a production that would impress most small armies. Gowns are being embroidered by women who haven't slept properly in weeks. One is spun gold, another is trimmed with imported lace that arrived with more ceremony than your first suitor. There are matching slippers, gloves perfumed with lavender, a headdress so heavy it might require a footstool to survive the evening. You're measured and remeasured until your waist becomes the court's primary topic of speculation. "She'll be stunning," the seamstress says. "She's meant for this." You try to believe her. There's one dress you're not allowed to see. The wedding gown. It's being kept under lock and key until the morning of the ceremony. It's spoken of in reverent tones, as if it has powers. "The fabric alone was blessed 3 times, says one of the ladies in waiting. "It came from Constantinople, or maybe Seville." You stop listening. You're too busy picturing yourself trying to breathe under layers of destiny. Your suitor writes you a letter. Not romantic. Stiff. Formal. "I await our union with honour," it begins. "May our houses find strength in one another." You're expected to write back. You do. You quote the Psalms. You thank him for the bracelet he sent, which you haven't worn and never will. You end the letter within loyal anticipation and feel yourself aging 5 years in one sentence. Meanwhile, the castle buzzes. Visitors arrive daily, carrying gifts and gossip. You're expected to receive them all, standing in an antechamber with your hands folded like a saint. They bring bolts of cloth, carved trinkets, sometimes livestock. One particularly ambitious merchant presents you with a miniature harp carved entirely from a single bone. You don't ask which animal. You just smile and say, "How exquisite," because that's what your governess mouths from behind the curtain. Everyone around. You behaves like the wedding is a coronation. There are dances every evening, musicians rehearsing in the chapel, florists wandering the halls with armfuls of lilies and ivy. "It's important to inspire joy," says the steward, "even in times of austerity." The fact that most of the kingdom is still recovering from a bad harvest is conveniently forgotten. Bread is scarce in the villages. Wine flows freely in the castle. You try not to notice the contradiction. You fail. Let's not forget the rituals. Medieval weddings aren't just parties with flower crowns and dancing. They're multi-day sagas of prayer, processions, formal speeches, feasts, and the ever-looming bedding ceremony. You've heard the whispers. You've pieced together the truth from snatches of hushed conversation and carefully non-explicit scripture references. What happens on your wedding night will not be gentle, or private, or optional. In some courts, the bedding is witnessed, either symbolically by onlookers who accompany you to the bedchamber and then politely step out, or more literally by senior court members who wait to examine the linens the next morning. You don't know which tradition your suitor's family follows. You're too afraid to ask. And here's a particularly uncomfortable fringe fact. Some noble women, in order to ensure a visible sign of virginity, were told to scratch themselves lightly with a pin to draw a drop of blood if the actual event did not. It's whispered like a secret spell among the older girls. One offers to give you a small needle, just in case. You take it. You hate that you take it. There's a scholarly debate about the extent to which royal women had any say in their wedding rituals. Some evidence suggests that noble brides could negotiate the terms of their dowry, their procession, even elements of the ceremony itself, if they had the political capital. Others argue that once the papers were signed, the woman became little more than ceremonial property. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between, with negotiation available only to those who knew how to smile while bleeding. The night before the wedding, you're led to a quiet room for a ritual cleansing. You're bathed in perfumed water by silent maids who do not meet your eyes. Then you're clothed in white linen and brought to the chapel, where a bishop lays his hand on your head and murmurs a blessing. "May she bear sons," he says. Not children, sons. You kneel for so long your knees go numb. You sleep badly. When dawn comes, you're woken by harp music and the sound of footsteps echoing off the stone floor. You're dressed like a relic, layer after layer until you can barely bend your arms. The gown is, in fact, stunning, but you don't see it. You're too busy watching your own hands, trying to remember if they belong to you. The procession begins at noon. The bells ring so loudly you feel them in your spine. The entire castle is watching. You walk down the aisle with your chin high and your expression neutral, what your governess once called grace under pressure, and what you now think of as emotional paralysis. The ceremony is a blur of incense and Latin and cold hands. Your suitor lifts your veil. He looks at you with pride, as if he's just acquired the most beautiful warhorse in the kingdom. You force your smile, the kind that's perfect in portraits. And when the vows are said, and the rings exchanged, and the court erupts in cheers that do not reach your ears, you realize something. This is the moment, the one you were raised for, the one that consumed your childhood, shaped your speech, trained your spine, weighed your shoulders, and it's not for you. It never was. You're married now, and the ink on the documents is barely dry when the first wave of strangeness hits you. Not fear, though there's plenty of that, but dislocation. One moment, you are a daughter of a royal household. The next, you are someone else's possession, transported across miles of damp stone and mossy forests, like a fragile artifact delivered under guard. You arrive in your husband's domain after a days-long journey, wrapped in veils and silence, blinking at a new castle that smells nothing like home. The place is colder, greyer. The tapestries are faded, the air thick with smoke from wet firewood, and the servants don't quite know how to greet you yet. You're both honoured and feared. You're not a guest, you're the future. But you're also a stranger, one with political baggage and a very well-documented uterus. Your husband doesn't accompany you at first. He arrives a day later, following behind his own entourage like he's coming to inspect a shipment. When he does greet you, it's formal, polite, and utterly transactional. "My lady," he says, kissing your hand. "Welcome." You can't tell if he means it. You doubt he cares. Now begins the settling-in period. You're installed in a new chamber, the ladies' room as it's called, perched high in a drafty tower with a view of nothing but fog and chimneys. It's yours, in theory. In practice, it's already been arranged. Your maids, only 2 came with you, the rest are from his court now, fuss over your belongings, repack your things in new armoires, and ask constantly whether you'd like hot wine, softer pillows, another warming pan. You say yes to everything, just to fill the silence. You're introduced to the court slowly. Each day brings another dinner with another set of vaguely curious nobles who all look like they want to peel you open and read the script inside. They ask about your parents, your embroidery, your taste in poetry. You answer in rehearsed phrases that feel like they were stitched into your gown. "I've always admired psalms with mirrored structure. My mother taught me the Montfleur stitch at age 7. My household maintained deep ties with the East and marches." They nod, satisfied, like you're a dish that arrived exactly as expected. But not all of them are friendly. Some look at you like you've taken something from them. And in a way, you have. Your arrival shifted the hierarchy. One cousin lost her place in the line of succession. Another lady was passed over as a match for the very man you now sleep beside. Your presence here is a threat, no matter how gently you speak or how flawlessly you pour wine at feasts. Your husband's mother watches you like a hawk. She corrects your posture with a glance. She rearranges your table settings. She praises your gown, and then critiques your hair. She calls you child, even though she knows your birthday. You suspect she's waiting for you to fail. You decide you won't, at least not where she can see it. And then come the letters. From your family, from your former ladies-in-waiting, from your governess, who signs hers with flowery Latin and a warning tone. Remember always to be pleasant. Remember your position. Your new household will be as warm as you make it. You read them with the kind of smile you used to practice in the mirror. Just enough curve to seem cheerful, not so much that anyone thinks you're foolish. There's a bizarre medieval ritual that creeps into your routine at this point. Every morning your new chambermaids place fresh flowers under your pillow. It's supposed to ensure fertility, not health, not strength, just fertility. You say thank you every time. You never complain. You just slide the blooms into the fire when they aren't looking. Your husband is a study in absence. When he's with you, he's polite but distant. He kisses your hand in public, praises your taste in wine, but never speaks to you for more than a few minutes in private. At night, he undresses with the speed of a man fulfilling a duty. The marital act is performed with all the passion of a knight tightening his armour. When it's over, he thanks you. You lie awake for hours afterward, staring at the canopy, wondering if he means it or if it's something he was told to say. There's a servant who brings you milk before bed. She's old, sharp-eyed, and says little. But one night, as she smooths the coverlet, she mutters, "He's not cruel. That's something." You don't know what to say, so you just nod. Here's a fact no one tells you about marriage in noble households. You don't own anything anymore. Not really. Your gowns are chosen for you. Your meals are decided by stewards. Your correspondence is read by someone before it ever reaches your husband, or your own parents. Even your calendar is arranged by someone else. You're the lady of the house, yes, but only if you follow the rules of the house, and you're being watched. Constantly. Not just by the maids, or the mother-in-law, or the nosy priests who always seem to hover just outside your chapel visits. You're watched by the castle itself. Every creak in the floorboards, every shadow in the corridor, every cold breath of wind through the window feels like it's whispering, "She's not one of us yet." You start to walk more quietly, you speak more carefully, you learn to read the map of this new place like it's a battlefield, because in many ways it is. Your letters to your mother grow shorter, not because there's nothing to say, but because there's too much you can't. You write things like, "He treats me well, and the castle is comfortable." You don't mention the way your skin prickles every time someone praises your duty. You don't mention how lonely it is, even with 24 servants and an entire court at your disposal. One morning you hear your name mentioned outside the chamber door. You press your ear to the wood and catch just 3 words before footsteps scatter. She's still barren. Barren. You've been married for 3 months. You scream into a pillow that night, muffling every sound until your throat burns. No one hears, or if they do, they know better than to ask. And yet, in public, you shine. You learn the layout of the feast table better than the cooks. You remember names, birthdays, allegiances. You praise your husband's hunting tales with exactly the right amount of awe. You visit the infirmary. You donate to the abbey. You're a queen in training even if your crown is invisible. Because even in a foreign castle, even under a name you didn't choose, even in a marriage built like scaffolding, cold, creaking, carefully reinforced, you're still a princess, and you still remember who you were before they shipped you here. You're 19 now, and though you've only been married a short while by royal standards, you're already a veteran of the courtly performance. You glide through feast halls and courtyards with the practiced elegance of someone who knows her every gesture is being measured. You've learned to nod thoughtfully when your husband tells a hunting story for the 5th time, to accept compliments that are just veiled comparisons to other women, and to appear grateful when an elderly bishop places a withered hand on your shoulder and murmurs, "Still young. There's time for heirs yet. Time for heirs." That's the phrase that now hangs around your neck like a rosary made of stone. You hear it in every conversation, tucked behind every smile. The pressure isn't sharp, it's slow, steady, the kind of force that wears down cliffs. Your womb has become the subject of speculative fiction. Every missed period sets the castle into a whispering frenzy. Every cramp, every faint spell, every extra nap is analysed like scripture. You once sneezed at dinner, and two ladies immediately turned to each other and said, "Could be a sign," but there are no signs, no swelling belly, no fluttering inside, just you and a perfectly functioning cycle, and a growing unease that is considered impolite to name aloud. Your husband doesn't mention it, yet, but his mother has. Twice. Once in the chapel, once in your solar, while adjusting the arrangement of your writing desk, as if order in your surroundings might inspire order in your uterus. The midwives have already begun their visits. They speak gently, respectfully, and carry an arsenal of warm compresses, tonics, and ridiculous advice. Avoid pears, says one. They chill the womb. Another suggests you lie only on your left side while sleeping, drink a mixture of goat's milk and clover, and wear a blue ribbon under your shift to encourage a boy. A boy, mind you. No one prays for girls. You endure it all because you must, because this is your function now. You're no longer just a wife or a princess. You're a vessel, a blueprint for succession. You can feel your importance recalibrating by the day, rising or falling based on rumours of nausea. One evening, you get dizzy while climbing the stairs and a maid nearly drops her tray in excitement. "You're with child," she declares. "You're not. You just skipped lunch." But the next day, your husband's steward congratulates you with a crooked smile, and you realise the truth doesn't matter. Perception is everything. You correct no one. You just move through the day like a ghost of something that might someday matter more. There's a fringe medical belief floating around your court, uttered by old women and certain too bold physicians, that infertility in royal women can be cured by placing blessed relics on the stomach. One such relic arrives in the form of a bone fragment, allegedly from a long-dead saint known for fruitful intercession. It's placed on your abdomen for an hour each morning while you recite a prayer that includes the phrase, "Open the gate of life." You do this for weeks, until one morning you fling the relic across the room and claim it slipped from your hand. The priest frowns. The midwife says nothing. There's another layer to this now. The subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, comparison between you and other women in court. Particularly one, a lady-in-waiting named Isolde, who married a lesser lord a month after you and is already halfway to her first child. She walks differently now, her belly rounded, her steps cautious and saint-like. People call her blessed. They say she shines. You sit across from her at dinner and smile so tightly it feels like a confession. And yet, your life continues as if everything is normal. You plan feasts, you manage correspondence, you embroider yet another altar cloth for the chapel, you maintain a calm, virtuous image that fools everyone, except yourself. At night, you lie awake listening to the wind through the stone slit of a window, thinking of all the things you've never been asked. What do you dream of? What do you fear? Do you even want children? Not that your answer would change anything. Let's drop in on a real historical debate here. Did medieval noblemen want to be mothers, or were they simply told they must be? Some scholars argue that many noblewomen embraced the role with sincere devotion, seeing motherhood as a sacred extension of their duty and identity. Others point out that high mortality rates, endless pressure, and lack of agency meant many women felt deeply ambivalent, even terrified. The truth, as always, likely falls somewhere in the space between silence and survival. One afternoon, you visit the castle library, a rare moment of solitude, and pull a medical manuscript from the shelf. It's full of absurd diagrams, mostly involving wombs shaped like upside-down bells, and bizarre treatments involving powdered emeralds. But tucked into the margins, scrawled in a smaller, different hand, is a note that reads, "There are many ways to grow something inside you. Not all of them bear fruit. You stare at it for a long time, you tear it out. You hide it under your mattress. You're reminded constantly to pray, so you do. But not for a child. You pray for air, for time, for space to think about anything other than your own anatomy. You light candles for women whose names you'll never know. You think of queens who died in labour or worse, lived, only to be blamed. You wonder how many of the saints were simply women who survived long enough to be forgotten. And then a letter arrives from your mother. It's soft, kind, full of coded encouragement. She says, "You are always strong." She says, "You must be gentle with yourself." She says, "The wind does not ask permission to move." You read it twice, then burn it, because you're afraid someone else will. Later that week, a servant girl, new, likely naive, asks if you love your husband. You blink, you don't answer, you don't need to. The question hovers in the air like dust motes caught in a sunbeam. You imagine catching one, trapping it in a bottle, keeping it as proof that someone once asked what you thought. In public you still shine, you still laugh, you still carry the relic. You host a feast for Isolde, you toast her unborn child, you compliment the glow in her cheeks, the way her hair shines in the sun, you tell her she'll be a wonderful mother, and you mean it. Because you're a princess, because that's what you do, because the role is bigger than the truth, and because no one cares whether the crown fits as long as you wear it. You're 20 now, and your wedding day is a memory you don't touch anymore. Like a burned finger, it still aches if you press too hard. The veil, the vows, the hollow cheer echoing in the banquet hall, it all lives in a room of your mind you keep tightly locked. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is the role you've grown into with such perfect precision it feels like second nature. You're not just a wife now. You're a hostess, a duchess, the feminine face of the estate, a walking symbol of refinement, loyalty, and eternal patience. This morning you hosted a visiting countess and her two impossibly polished daughters. They fluttered in like doves carved from marble, all wide eyes and passive-aggressive flattery. "You've adapted to this court so well," said the older daughter, with a smile so crisp you could fold it into origami. You replied, "It's been a joy to serve this house," while imagining tossing her into the moat. And because you're expected to maintain poise in all situations, you also endure, gracefully, the endless line of suitors sniffing around your court, now that your title holds real estate. You're not on the market, obviously, but your name carries weight, and people want favours, alliances, marriages for their sisters, cousins, future children. You've become a kind of social hub, a neutral face where other people's ambitions go to be gently redirected or blessed. You listen, you nod, you say, "Perhaps." Then you whisper your actual opinion to your steward later. But the real centre of your orbit is your husband, who is still polite, still functional, still as emotionally distant as a statue in a garden you're not allowed to touch. In public, he's dutiful. In private, he's a ghost who eats dinner 2 courses ahead of you and speaks only in clipped observations. We should begin planning for winter stores. The wheat yield is adequate this season. You've handled the candle budget well. You thank him each time like you've just received a love sonnet, and yet, despite the coolness, there's been a subtle shift, a new urgency in his tone, a nervous glance when your cycle arrives, punctually and without fail. You're still childless, and though no one says the word aloud anymore, its ghost haunts every hallway. The pressure has begun to sour. You no longer get gentle encouragement. Now, it's quiet disapproval, strategic disappointment, an unspoken sense that your window is closing and your usefulness, your value, is fading with it. You've now attended 3 baptisms in your husband's extended family. 3, each one louder and more extravagant than the last. You smiled through them all, kissed the babies' foreheads, gave gifts of silver rattles and cloth-bound psalters. Then you went home, sat in your chapel, and didn't move for hours. At one of these baptisms, a particularly bold dowager took your hand and said, "There's still hope." Sarah was 90. You smiled, but inside you wanted to ask whether Sarah had to balance the trade routes, moderate the harvest tithe, and sit through 2-hour sermons on virtuous obedience while her husband flirted with a girl who couldn't name 3 saints. Because yes, that's happening now too. The flirtation. Nothing scandalous, nothing actionable, just slow poison. Your husband lingers too long near one of your new ladies in waiting. Helena, her name is. Sweet-faced, quick to blush, always carrying fresh lavender sachets. You pretend not to notice. Because what's worse than watching your husband's attention drift? Watching everyone else notice it before you. One day you pass Helena in the corridor and she drops her eyes too quickly. She curtsies too deeply. You want to scream, but instead you smile and say, "Thank you for keeping him in good spirits. He's seemed lighter of late." She pales. You walk away victorious. Small wins, but they matter. And now we come to the truly dreadful piece of this era's marriage experience, the bedding ceremony. Not your wedding night. That horror show has come and gone. But the long-standing expectation that royal couples, even years after marrying, are occasionally witnessed to ensure consummation is ongoing. That it's not just a legal arrangement, that heirs are, at the very least, being attempted. It's rare, but it happens. You've heard of it in other courts. Witnesses standing outside the bedchamber door, waiting, listening, sometimes peeking. It's meant to be ceremonial, of course, just a formality. But the message is clear. Your body is not private. Your marriage is not yours. Your court hasn't imposed that, yet. But the threat hangs there, unspoken. Your husband mentions, casually over wine, that the king's steward has inquired about your domestic rhythms. You nearly choke on your bread. He doesn't elaborate. He doesn't need to. Let's pause for a real scholarly debate here. How often were noblewomen subjected to this kind of ceremonial oversight? Records vary wildly. Some historians say it was mostly symbolic, used only in disputed claims. Others argue it was more common than we'd like to believe, especially when the marriage involved significant land or bloodlines. What's certain is that the fear of it was enough to enforce compliance. You didn't need to be watched to feel watched. You just needed to know someone might be watching. So you prepare. You go through the motions, you host the feasts, you keep up appearances. You walk beside your husband like a second shadow, and you never ever show fatigue. Fatigue is weakness. Fatigue is common. You're not common. You're an institution. And still, you're not pregnant. Your monthly bleeds arrive like clockwork, each one a cruel little page in a calendar you never agreed to follow. You begin tracking them obsessively, praying for a late arrival, for anything that might signal a change. But your body remains as obedient as you are, which, in this case, feels like betrayal. You dream often now, strange dreams. You're walking through a garden that's always changing, one moment full of roses, the next filled with ash. You reach for a child who vanishes. You open a cradle to find a mirror. You don't tell anyone these dreams. You're not supposed to dream, you're supposed to fulfill. But deep inside, a quiet defiance stirs. You begin to write again. Only at night, only in code. Small spiralling phrases hidden behind hymnals, buried in prayer books. You write about silence, about longing, about wanting to set fire to the tapestries and watch them burn down to thread. You don't show anyone. You don't even sign your name. But you feel more alive in those stolen moments than in all the banquets combined. One night you wake in a cold sweat and slip from your chamber. You walk barefoot to the western tower where no one goes. You press your palm against the old stone wall and whisper, "I am not empty." You say it again, louder. You wait for an echo. None comes, but that doesn't mean it wasn't heard. You are 21 now, and the whispers have become louder than the sermons. People still bow to you, still smile and call you gracious lady and light of the household, but behind your back they're sharpening their tongues. They say it kindly at first. She is graceful, but the line must continue. So devout, poor thing. There's still time, of course. But the tone shifts, bit by bit, like wine souring in a cask. Soon they stop speaking as if it's about time. They speak as if it's about failure. Your husband grows quieter, if that's even possible. His eyes linger longer on Helena. He doesn't avoid you, he's far too trained for that, but he withdraws in ways only you can measure. He no longer kisses your hand before supper. He no longer touches your wrist when passing the salt. His affection has been archived, filed away under married duties completed. The court has adjusted accordingly. Your position is unchanged in name, but subtly undermined in function. You used to preside over the lady's garden, now the steward's wife does. You once hosted visiting nobles in the solar, now Helena assists. A soft coup, not declared, not official, but very, very real. You want to scream. You want to throw a goblet and shatter the ceiling beams with your voice. But you don't. You smile. You wear your finest gowns. You practice diplomacy so smooth it could butter iron. You're the queen of false calm. Your expression has become a weapon, and you wield it like a dagger pressed against a silken throat. Your health begins to shift. Nothing serious, just weariness that seeps into your bones, headaches that bloom like thunder behind your eyes, appetite that comes and goes like a distracted servant. The midwife shrugs. "Nerves," she says. "Try holy water with powdered silver." You do. It tastes like regret and metal. You begin spending more time in the chapel, not out of devotion exactly, more out of necessity. It's the only room where no one talks to you. The saints don't gossip. The candles don't ask about heirs. You kneel. You pretend to pray. Sometimes you just sit and breathe and wonder what would happen if you simply walked into the forest and never returned. But that, of course, is not an option. You're a duchess, a wife, a royal woman with duties and responsibilities and no space for escape. Until, one morning, something unexpected happens. You bleed, but it's not your usual cycle. It's too light, too early, and your body feels strange. Not ill, just off. You say nothing. You wait. You count days. Then you wait some more. You begin waking up nauseous. Your skin changes, paler but warmer. Your sense of smell sharpens. You nearly faint at the sight of boiled onions. And suddenly, everyone is watching again. The midwife is summoned. She touches your wrist, your belly, your temples. She asks how long since your last true bleeding. You lie. You say you're unsure. She nods gravely and tells your husband. A celebration begins. Quiet. Cautious. But real. Candles are lit in the chapel. The cook prepares sweetened milk and honey buns. You're told to rest, to lie on your left side, to avoid loud music. Everyone treats you like an egg with gold inside. Helena disappears, for now. Your husband visits your chamber each evening and speaks in low, deliberate tones. We must pray for a son, he says like a mantra. You nod. You press your hand to your abdomen and say nothing. But here's the thing, you don't feel pregnant. You feel wrong. Not like something is growing, but like something is unravelling. Another week passes, then another. The nausea returns stronger. Your stomach cramps at night. Your spine aches. Your mood spirals. The midwife insists this is normal, that all first pregnancies feel uncertain, unsteady, slightly like dying. But you've been inside your body your whole life. You know what it feels like when something is truly wrong. And one night, you wake to blood. Not a spot, not a smear, a flood. You don't scream. You don't wake the servants. You sit alone on the edge of your bed, staring at your palms, feeling the world tilt and tip. By morning it's gone, whatever it was, whatever hope it was. The midwife confirms it with a grim look and the phrase, God's will be done. Your husband says nothing, just leaves the room with a jaw clenched so tight it looks like it might crack. Helena reappears the next day with a tray of broth and a face full of faux concern. You nod, you drink, you grieve silently. Here's a curious medieval belief. Miscarriages were sometimes blamed on witchcraft, especially if they happened repeatedly. If a woman failed to bear a child, it wasn't always seen as biology. It was seen as betrayal by her body, her mind, or some nearby jealous woman with a talent for herbs. No one has said the word witch in your hearing, but you've seen the way some of the older court ladies glance at you sideways. You felt the frost in their God bless yous. Historians often argue about how miscarriages were treated in noble courts. Some accounts suggest sympathy, genuine mourning, gentle consolation. Others document blame, exile, even annulment. It all depended on the court, on the politics, on how badly they needed an heir. Your court, they mourn you like a failed harvest, politely, quietly, but with clear consequence. You're allowed to rest for a week. Then it's back to business, back to suppers, back to embroidered lies stitched into your sleeves. No one asks if you're okay. That question doesn't exist in your vocabulary anymore. But something has changed. You no longer care quite so much what anyone thinks. It's not a full rebellion, not yet. But it's a spark, a kind of quiet rebellion that sits beneath your breastbone and grows stronger each time someone asks about your womb. You start walking more briskly through the halls. You speak less softly. You cancel a feast and blame fatigue, even though you just want to sit by yourself and reread your secret collection of coded poetry. One night, your husband enters your chamber unannounced. He doesn't say anything, just stands by the window staring out into the fog. Finally he says, "We'll try again." You look at him, and for the first time you answer, "Will we?" The silence that follows is long, too long, but you don't flinch. You've bled enough for one lifetime. You're 22, and your world has shrunk again. Not because your chambers are smaller, though they feel like they are, but because the cold space around you has thickened. After the miscarriage, the court moved on without you, not out of malice, not even out of disappointment, really. It's just that you've slipped off the board. You were the queen-to-be, the mother-in-waiting, the golden vessel of lineage. Now you're simply A woman with no heir. You're still technically powerful, still married, still duchess, still expected to smile, host, and bless babies that aren't yours. But the energy has shifted. No more quiet awe, no more hushed talk of the one who will bring strength to the bloodline. You're tolerated now, like a statue that can't be moved because it's too expensive to replace. You go to fewer feasts, you decline most invitations, you take your meals in your solar, under the pretense of recovery, though everyone knows that phase ended months ago. What you're really recovering from is the feeling of being hollowed out, like a book with its pages torn free and its cover still smiling from the shelf. Your husband does not speak of it, at all. He continues with his routines, hunting, council meetings, reviewing tariffs on grain like nothing ever happened. He still attends mass every morning, kneels, crosses himself, murmurs Latin verses about forgiveness and humility. But he never once says your name in the chapel. And Helena thrives. The sparkle in her eye has returned. Her voice is higher now, girlish, as if to rewind the years between you. She no longer avoids you. Now she greets you with just enough cheer to make you want to shove a candlestick through a window. You never do. You only smile and respond, "Good morning," like you didn't hear her laugh echo down the corridor after the midwife passed her chamber. You begin walking at night. Not far, just small loops around the inner courtyard when everyone else is asleep. The air is sharp, sometimes damp with mist, and it smells of wet stone and pine resin from the torches. You walk in silence, trailing your fingers along the wall, sometimes reciting poetry under your breath. You don't need an audience, you just need a version of yourself that isn't performing. One night you stumble upon an old servant tending to the herb garden by moonlight. She glances at you and says, "It's good to speak to the ground when no one else listens." You say nothing, but from then on you make sure to pass her patch on every walk. She never says another word, but she always nods. You begin to write again. You dig up old scraps of parchment, tuck them between pages of psalters, hide them in the folds of cloaks no one checks. You write about silence, about sorrow, about anger shaped like saints. The act of writing, of putting your thoughts into ink, isn't rebellion. Not exactly. It's survival, a way to keep the fire warm when no one brings wood. You also begin to notice the others like you, the women on the edge, the ones who do not laugh easily, the ones who drift at the edge of the court's attention. There's Lady Amara, whose husband left for crusade 8 years ago and never returned. There's Cecily, who lost 3 infants and now walks as if her limbs are made of glass. There's the old nursemaid who never speaks unless spoken to, but always seems to know who is crying in which wing of the castle. You find strength in them, not because they're strong, but because they're still here. You understand now, survival is not always a battle cry. Sometimes it's just sitting through another long meal, another false blessing, another hour of staring at your own reflection and wondering who will blink first. Let's take a moment for a strange historical footnote. In certain medieval courts, barren noblewomen were sometimes gifted small animals, lapdogs, rabbits, songbirds. It was considered a form of comfort, a way to nurture something harmless. One day, a page delivers a dove to your chamber. "From the steward," he says, not meeting your eye. The dove is snow white, useless, pretty. You keep it. You name it Patience. You stop short of finding that funny. Your days are quiet, but not empty. You've taken up more domestic oversight, subtly, without drawing attention. You begin sitting in on servant meetings. You suggest food storage changes that save gold. You streamline textile orders. You reorganize the library's records under the pretense of inventory, though really you just want to know what's hidden there. Your husband doesn't stop you. Maybe he doesn't notice. Or maybe he knows better than to interfere when you're finally being useful in a way that doesn't involve bleeding. And yet, you are still watched. Not with curiosity now, but calculation. Rumours begin to swirl. Perhaps she's cursed. Perhaps her bloodline is flawed. Perhaps the duchy should prepare for contingency. You hear the word annulment whispered once by a young knight in the corridor. He flushes when he sees you. You don't respond. He's not worth the effort. There's a scholarly argument about this phase of a noblewoman's life, when the expectation of motherhood begins to falter. Some believe women in your position were quietly set aside, stripped of influence and left to fade. Others suggest they found new power in managing estates, running households, and even guiding the younger women who were stepping into the very path that failed you. You suspect it depends on the woman, and you are not fading. You begin writing letters again, not to your mother, not to anyone in court. Letters addressed to no one. prayers disguised as poetry, warnings written like lullabies. You tuck them behind altar cloths, into servant storerooms, under the cushions of guest chairs. Let them find their readers, or not. It doesn't matter. The words exist now, and that is enough. One evening, Helena passes you in the hall and says, "Are you feeling better?" You stop. You turn to her and say, gently, "I'm feeling inevitable." She doesn't know what that means, but she remembers it. You can see it in her face. You sleep better after that. Your reflection has changed. Not in the way the portrait artist once captured it. Smooth, radiant, full of promise. Now you look real. There are lines near your eyes, a curve to your mouth that never quite reaches joy. But you've never looked more like yourself. You wear darker colours now, not black. Too obvious. Deep greens, midnight blue, iron grey. The court begins to notice. They say, "The Duchess has grown sombre," but they don't say it unkindly. They say it with caution, as if you're not just a woman anymore, as if you're something older, something colder, something forged. You're 23 and no longer the topic of courtly flirtation or gossip, so much as the subject of quiet admiration and studied fear. Not for beauty, not anymore. That season has passed, like a spring remembered fondly but forgotten in detail. Now you are a force, not loud, not showy, but unmistakably present. You walk the corridors of your husband's castle like they were carved from your breath. People step aside not out of deference, but because they simply assume you belong where they do not. You didn't plan this. You didn't rise like a phoenix or plot like some scheming matron from a minstrel's tale. You simply endured, long enough, quietly enough that your survival itself became a kind of legend. And somewhere along the way people started asking for your opinion, just occasionally at first, then regularly, now routinely, even your husband. It begins with a grain shortage. A failed shipment from the Western Holdings threatens winter stores. You step in, calmly suggest rotating portions with dried lentils and smoked fish. Reach out to Abbey Cellars and arrange quiet trades with a rival noble house who still remembers you gave their daughter a prayer shawl during her wedding. By the time the steward realises what you've done, the problem's solved. Your husband calls it efficient, you call it obvious. From there, it grows. Trade routes, diplomatic letters, questions of staffing. Lady Amara recommends you for a land dispute hearing. You preside without blinking, delivering a ruling that earns begrudging approval from both sides. The Duchess sees everything, someone mutters afterward. You do not correct them. It's true. You're not an official voice on the council, but you're present at more and more of its meetings. You sit slightly apart, never at the main table, never with a seal of your own, but you're asked to speak. What does Her Grace advise, the Marshal asks one day, about troop rotations? You blink once, then answer. Later your husband tells you you're useful. Not brilliant, not essential, just useful. It should sting. It doesn't. He meant it as a compliment. You accept it as a promotion. Now comes the delicate dance. Power in petticoats. Because you cannot rule outright. That would be unseemly, unnatural, undesirable. You're still a wife, remember? A duchess, with no heir and no political claim strong enough to make you more. So your power must wear lace. It must pass through embroidery hoops and wedding gifts and softly worded letters signed in flowing ink. Your influence wears a corset, and you've laced it tight. You begin hosting private gatherings, small candlelit salons in your solar, not feasts, not political summits, just quiet circles of noblewomen, stewards' wives, and occasionally favoured clerics. You talk about books, about weather, about gardens and music and saints, and also, buried carefully beneath the niceties, about treaties, tax structures, what crops the peasants are planting this year. You float questions like petals in a bowl. You gather answers like rain. This is power, not the crown, not the sceptre, but the knowing. You start keeping a journal, not poetry anymore, strategy, a record of who is marrying whom, who's fallen ill, who shifted loyalties, who received an oddly expensive gift from an outlying manor. You become the court's unofficial memory. Here's a quirky medieval fact to stir your tea. Some noblewomen used embroidery as code. Stitched flowers, patterns and colour choices sometimes held secret meanings. Messages hidden in linens, shawls, even church hangings. You've taken up embroidery again, and yes, your patterns now include certain symbols. ivy for endurance, falcons for watchfulness, wolves hidden among lilies. You gift them to the women who attend your salons. Most don't notice. A few do, one winks. You do not smile, but you sew faster. Of course, not everyone is thrilled by your quiet ascent. There are mutterings. From Helena, mostly, who has drifted back into the role of courtly ornament now that her moment of favour has passed. She still wears lavender and soft slippers and has that too loud laugh, but she has no function, and that, in your world, is fatal. You catch her once whispering with a cousin by the fountain. When you walk past, they both fall silent. You pause, turn, and say, "Be sure to water the herbs. They dry out faster than people think." Then you keep walking. A small reminder that you hear everything. Your husband remains useful. He doesn't challenge you, doesn't hinder you, and in certain quiet moments he even seems to appreciate you. You suspect he knows your influence makes him look more competent. He gains credit for things you handle. He smiles more now at council meetings, offers more wine at banquets. He is, in his own distant way, grateful. That's enough. There's a scholarly debate. Yes, another, about whether women like you were truly respected by their peers, or merely tolerated until they could be replaced. Some point to records of noble women managing entire estates in their husbands' absences, or maintaining regional peace through carefully brokered marriages. Others suggest their influence was always an illusion, power granted only in the cracks of male failure. But you know better. You've seen what happens when a woman becomes necessary. Even the cracks become strong enough to stand on. You're invited to mediate a dispute between two merchant guilds. A woman. Settling a merchant quarrel. Scandalous. Unprecedented. Effective. You resolve it in 2 meetings and a carefully written letter. The merchants send you a tapestry of the city's coat of arms. You hang it behind your reading chair. Then, your mother writes. It's a short letter. Her handwriting has changed. Smaller, more cramped. She says, "I hear your name spoken with respect. I am proud." She includes a prayer for strength and an old recipe for honey cakes. You cry when you read it. Not a sob, just a quiet leaking of salt water. The kind your chambermaid pretends not to notice as she lights your candle. You bake the cakes. You eat one. You keep the rest for your next gathering. You begin to notice something you didn't expect. The younger women look to you now. They copy your style. They ask your opinion. They quote you. One even mimics your handwriting in her prayer book. You correct her gently, but you're secretly pleased. You're no longer a woman waiting to be replaced. You have become a pattern. The castle hums around you. The walls know your pace. The floors remember your steps. You're no longer surviving here. You're rooted, and for the first time, truly, since the day you were married, you feel like you belong. Not as a daughter, not as a bride, not as a vessel or ghost, but as a woman. One who made something of nothing. One who stitched her name into the fabric of stone. You're 24 now, and with each passing month, your power grows more unspoken. That's the key, really. You've learned that true influence isn't loud. It's not a shout across the hall or a decree read from parchment. No, real power is the kind people don't realise they're obeying until it's already guiding their hand. You've mastered it like a second language. Calm nods, careful pauses, an eyebrow raised at exactly the right moment. You speak softly and watch entire rooms tilt. You've become the one people approach when they don't want to ask your husband directly. You're easier, they say, more reasonable, which really just means you listen without pretending to be infallible. You know which knights drink too much, which cooks are skimming from the pantry, and which servants are passing letters between chambers that should remain sealed. You're not omniscient. You've simply been watching longer than anyone else. Helena has finally married. A minor nobleman from the northern woodlands, respectable, but unimpressive. The court celebrated, though not lavishly. You attended, naturally, gave a necklace, said all the right things, and when she thanked you for your support, you held her hands and said, "I'm glad you found a place where you'll be cherished." It sounded like a blessing. It wasn't. Your husband has taken to spending long hours in the hunting lodge. It suits both of you. He returns red-cheeked and winded, smelling of bark and leather. You smile, share polite conversation, and sleep on opposite sides of the bed, occasionally brushing ankles like strangers on a long journey. You no longer ache for his attention. That wound has scarred over, calloused in the way only time can manage. You see him now not as a husband, but as a partner in a shared illusion. And illusions, if well maintained, are sometimes stronger than truth. With your name now firmly associated with stability and wisdom, letters arrive from nearby holdings. Requests for arbitration, invitations to advise on marriages, to settle border disputes, even to recommend clergy appointments. The bishop consults you more frequently now. He visits your solar with scrolls and sallow eyes, asking for your counsel on matters of morality and land rights. You offer measured responses, but once you ask him, "Do you ever get tired of being good?" He does not answer, but he stops asking if you're praying enough. There's a curious trend you've noticed. Widows are the freest women at court. Once their husbands die, and if they've borne at least one child, they're granted an almost sacred autonomy. They manage estates, own property, even speak at councils. You've begun to imagine what life would look like years from now, should fate deliver that freedom to you. You feel slightly wicked just thinking it, but not guilty, never guilty. Here's a fringe historical tidbit for you. In some courts, noble women past childbearing age would serve as unofficial advisors to kings, acting as go-betweens for clergy and court, sometimes even issuing their own household decrees. One woman, a Baroness of Eltford, was rumoured to run her entire province through strongly worded embroidery. You don't know if that story's true, but you've started sewing again, not for decoration, for symbolism. Red threads now, stark against cream linen, not easily missed. There's another crisis in the outlying farms. Floods this time, soaking through the barley stores. The steward is flustered. The peasants are restless. You step in again, negotiate rations, organise relief from the abbey, redistribute wool to the damp cottages before the weather turns colder. You're no longer applauded for your efforts. They're just expected. You've become part of the system now, the piece that doesn't squeak. And still, despite all this, despite the respect, the success, the carefully built web, you're aware of one thing lingering like smoke, your barrenness. No child has come. None likely will. You've stopped tracking your cycles, stopped swallowing bitter herbs and whispering over relics. Even the midwife has stopped knocking at your door with hopeful eyes. She now simply nods when she passes, as one veteran might acknowledge another. There's a certain calm in this, a kind of freedom. You're no longer waiting, you're living. Not for someone else's future, not for your family's name, not for your husband's legacy. Just for now, for the work, for the reputation you've built thread by thread, like a tapestry made in secret. Your court has grown used to it too. They no longer whisper in doorways or cast long glances after dinner. You're seen now not as a failed mother, but as the Duchess, the steady hand, the whisper of order in a world that often feels like it's tilting toward chaos. And yet, there are still moments, rare ones, but real, when you catch a baby's laugh in the courtyard and something flickers behind your ribs. Not longing, not even grief anymore, just an echo, a version of yourself that once waited, cried, hoped, bled. She's still in there, but she's softer now, quieter. You keep her company sometimes, but you don't let her steer. You visit the abbey often these days, not to pray really, just to walk. To talk with the abbess who's nearly blind but sharp as flint. She says once, "You should have been born a man. You'd have been king twice over." You reply, "I was born a woman." "I've ruled 3 times as well." She laughs until she coughs. It's a good moment. There's a celebration coming soon, 20 years since your husband's father passed. A memorial feast. You're in charge of planning it, of course. You choose the food, the readings, the order of honour. You even choose the musicians. You hire a lute player known for singing haunting ballads about queens who vanished into the forest and returned with fire in their mouths. No one catches the reference but you. That's enough. The night before the celebration, you sit in your solar alone, watching candlelight flicker across the floor. Your journal lies open, a red ribbon tucked into its spine. You dip your quill and write, "This castle is not mine, but the silence here obeys me." You smile, because you know what it means to be forgotten. You also know what it means to be remembered, not in song perhaps, but in law, in trade, in the way the hallways echo when you pass, and the way the staff's rhythm changes when you speak. You're not loved by all. You don't need to be. You've become something rarer, respected. And respect, unlike affection, doesn't vanish when the roses die. You're 25 now, and you've learned to smile in the face of treachery, not the kind with daggers and poisoned wine, but the slow, courteous kind that arrives wrapped in silk and bows before it cuts. The court calls them rivals, but that's too soft a word. Threats is closer. Women who want what you have, not your husband, he's hardly a prize anymore, but your place, your reach, your authority. That invisible throne you've built from silence and competence. The first of them arrives under the guise of friendship. Lady Edwina, a noble cousin from the Eastern Marches, recently widowed and seeking peace. You meet her in the great hall, wrapped in fur, her mouth a perfect pink bow of grief. She kisses your cheek and says, "You've always been an inspiration." You almost laugh, because the way she scans the room as she says it tells you exactly what she's here for. Influence. She attends your salons, laughs at your jokes, sends you small gifts, pear preserves, hand-inked prayers, a carved rosary from her abbey's shrine. She speaks fondly of your marriage and notes, with apparent sympathy, how difficult the road to motherhood must have been. You smile back and think of the phrase, "a snake with a song in its mouth." Edwina isn't alone. She's the first of several. One by one they trickle in. Widows, second daughters, married women whose husbands are often away. They're polite, charming, beautiful in the way that threatens without effort. They claim they admire you. What they really mean is, "I want to be you, or remove you." You've become a target because you're something unusual. A powerful woman without children. That makes people nervous. You're not tamed by motherhood, not consumed by a cradle. You have time, attention, and, worst of all, control. You're unpredictable. You've stepped out of the mould, and the mould wants revenge. Meanwhile, your husband has grown bored. Not cruel, just distant. Again. He sees the attention the new women draw and begins orbiting them. Nothing blatant, nothing scandalous. Just that telltale shift in the air, the way he lingers a second longer near Edwina's fan, the way he praises the latest arrival's harp playing with a tone he once reserved for your piety. It's irritating, not heartbreaking. You've built walls so thick your feelings now echo before they reach you. But this new tension, it changes your days. You have to be watchful now, not fearful, just strategic. Everything you've built hangs in a delicate balance, and one false move, a misplaced comment, a perceived insult, a single frown, could collapse your entire castle of influence. So you become sharper, softer but sharper, like a pillow filled with iron filings. You extend invitations sparingly, you test loyalties with gentle misinformation, drop a false detail here, a fabricated grudge there, and watch where it surfaces. You discover quickly who repeats what, who watches too closely, who curtsies with knees too tight. And through it all the pressure remains, the unspoken question of succession. The whispers still haunt the corners. The Duchess is aging. Perhaps a new marriage is needed. The line must continue. You're still married, yes, still Duchess. But the lack of an heir now looms not as a tragedy, but as a problem. One some would like to fix. You hear rumours that a petition has been drafted, unofficial of course, suggesting an annulment, on the grounds of childlessness, not dishonour, just divine misalignment, an act of unfortunate fate. You know exactly who delivered it to the Chancellor. You even know which ink they used. You simply send them a basket of saffron pears with a ribbon and a note. My prayers are with your conscience. Here's the historical twist you've always feared. Barren noblewomen could be cast aside, especially when politics demanded it. The Church offered convenient loopholes for annulment in cases of non-consummation or childlessness. Marriage, they preached, exists for the begetting of children. Your husband hasn't said anything yet, but he doesn't need to. The silence is heavy enough. Still, not all attention is hostile. One evening the bishop asks to speak with you privately. You brace for a lecture about duty, repentance, or your role in the great moral order of things. Instead, he sits beside you and says, they fear you, because you don't need them. Then he sips his wine and leaves. You stare at the empty goblet for a long time. You understand now that your real job is performance. Not the false kind, not hollow mimicry, but precision. You must always appear gracious, wise, untouchable. If they sense vulnerability, they will pounce. So you play the role with elegance. You bless children. You give gifts. You comment on the moon phases and praise local cheese. You even recommend Edwina's poem to the court minstrel. But in private you write. You write more than ever. Not letters, not poems, records, observations, patterns. You keep track of who visits whom, who changes alliances, who misses mass, who receives gifts that they do not report to the steward. It's not a ledger, it's a map. And you're learning every hidden road in this court. The younger ladies come to you still, for advice, for gossip, for quiet confessions whispered like bedtime prayers. You listen. You teach them how to carry themselves, how to watch. You become something rare, a mentor in a world that rarely lets women age with dignity. You're becoming legend, a legend with no heirs. That truth still stings, some days more than others. You see a baby swaddled in the arms of a nursemaid and feel a stab, sudden and sharp like a needle in the soul. You never cry, not anymore, but you feel it. A grief so old it's become part of your skeleton. You visit the chapel one cold morning, long before anyone else is awake. You kneel. You say nothing. Then, without meaning to, you whisper, "Was I meant for this?" The candles don't flicker. No voice answers, but the quiet feels heavier. That's enough. A scholarly debate lingers here, one that might matter to you if you were a parchment and not a person. Some argue that women like you, unmothered, unmothering, had no real role in history. Others argue that they were essential. Advisors, protectors, peacekeepers, the silent architects behind the bloodlines that would outlive them. You're not sure which you are. Perhaps both. The feast season approaches again. You're expected to host. You do, with perfection. You arrange roses and lilies so precisely that a visiting noble asks if they symbolize a prayer. You respond, they symbolize what remains after storms. He doesn't understand. He praises the roast. Later that night, after the hall is cleared and the music fades, you return to your solar. You sit at your writing table, dip your quill, and write, "I have no heirs, but I have witnesses," and that too is a kind of legacy. You are 26, and this castle, once an unfamiliar stronghold of damp stone and rigid rituals, has become your body's second skin. You know the creak of every stair, the slow drip of water behind the eastern parapet, the wind patterns that hum through the long gallery in winter. When something is out of place, a door ajar, a new servant, the sudden absence of a hawk from its perch, you feel it like a splinter beneath your nail. You're no longer surviving here. You're ruling, even if no one calls it that out loud. And the rumours, well, they've adapted too. Where once people whispered about your barrenness, now they whisper about your reach. Your name has become a form of leverage. The Duchess favours them, someone says, and a merchant's petition moves faster. The Duchess spoke kindly, and a land dispute ends peacefully. People invoke you as if you're both queen and saint. They forget you were ever just a woman standing silently behind your husband. Your influence no longer needs announcement. It walks ahead of you, trailing behind like a second cloak. Even your husband acknowledges it now, though always indirectly. "She keeps the court balanced," he says at feasts. Or, "My wife has a fine mind for correspondence. He rarely makes decisions without asking for your thoughts, though he still pretends they were his ideas. That's fine. Let him have that illusion. It costs you nothing, and the real power remains in your hands. You've begun managing regional matters beyond the castle walls. Drought relief, grain allocation, arbitrating taxes between abbeys and millers. Clergy and merchants alike have grown accustomed to sending their concerns to you, instead of the official treasurer. The treasurer doesn't mind. In fact, he's relieved. Her Grace is more organised, he says, which is nobleman speak, for she actually listens. But even with your growing autonomy, your position remains precarious. Because the truth hasn't changed. You are childless. Still. Always. And that fact sits in the corner of every conversation like a ghost with perfect posture. You've outlasted expectations, sure, but not the system that shaped them. Your power is still loaned to you. You still have to smile at women who would see you replaced and hand blessings to babies who are being groomed to inherit the world that forgot you. You attend another christening. A boy, this time, born to a cousin with the moral fortitude of a goat. You wear your best gown. You carry the carved rattle. You say all the right things, and as the baby screams through the ritual, you stare at the gold basin and feel nothing. Not grief, not envy, just a silence that stretches endlessly, like winter. That night, you return to your chamber and unwrap a bundle of old letters hidden deep within your wardrobe. Letters from your mother, letters you never responded to. You read them again, slower this time, tracing the faded ink like it might spell something different now. One reads, "You were not born for ease, my daughter, but for endurance." That too is a form of greatness. You fold it back up and place it beneath your pillow. The young women at court still come to you, more than ever now. They bring their questions, their worries, their hearts beating like frightened birds. "How do I say no when everyone expects yes?" one asks, weeping into her sleeve. You don't offer platitudes, you don't lie. You say, learn how to speak their language and then make it say what you need. She nods like you've handed her a sword. But not everyone appreciates your quiet command. Your husband's advisors, some of the older ones, relics in velvet and complaints, begin to press him with new urgency. There must be an heir, they insist. A future must be secured. You hear talk of potential wards, adopted from distant bloodlines. Whispers of annulment rise again, slower this time, like steam from a cauldron no one dares stir too hard. Then, unexpectedly, your husband calls you to the West Tower, the same place where, years ago, you stood in bridal white and watched your world shrink into a corset. He says little at first, only that there have been discussions. They want a younger bride, he says, one with a womb unproven. He doesn't meet your eyes. You ask, do you want that? And for the first time in your memory, he hesitates. No, he finally says, but I also don't want war after I'm gone. You nod slowly, as if considering a dinner menu, not your own erasure. This is the closest he's come to choosing you, and even this choice is clothed in strategy. You return to your solar and consider your next move. Not rage, not despair, tactics. That's your reflex now. If they try to dissolve your place, they must go through every channel you've built, every favour you've granted, every ally who owes you more than they owe your husband. You've kept your enemies close, your informants closer, and your strengths hidden in plain sight. Here's something they don't teach in fairy tales. Castles are kept standing not by kings, but by women with good memory and sharper eyes. You know the records, you are the records. The steward once joked that you remember more about the grain tax than the scribe. He wasn't wrong. You've written your name into this place, not with banners, but with order. Let's not ignore the scholarly debate, of course. Some claim women in your position were always vulnerable to replacement, no matter their accomplishments. That men, even when impressed by a woman's mind, would trade it in for a chance at legacy. Others argue that women like you found a second life in religion, diplomacy or regency. You've considered all three, but none suit you as well as this, the quiet war of staying exactly where you are. You don't sleep that night. You walk the corridors in your robe, your slippers soft against the flagstones. You stop beneath a window and watch the courtyard below, blanketed in fog. The world is still, waiting. So are you. The next day, you begin drafting letters. Not of protest, not of surrender, of reminders. You thank the bishop for his continued spiritual support. You congratulate the Merchant Guild on their recent expansion and offer to host a supper. You send a basket of preserved figs to the steward's aging mother. You remind them, gently, wordlessly, that you're not just a duchess. You are the one who remembers, who fixes, who knows. And as the days pass, the whispers fade again. Not gone, never gone, but reduced to a manageable murmur. You've won this round, not with swords, but with silence, with time, with everything they never expected a barren woman to wield. You're not the woman they hoped for, you're the woman they need, and no matter what the stories say, no matter how many sons are born in the rooms below, you know the truth. Some legacies are built with breath, not blood. You're 27, and everything feels slower now, not in the way of boredom, but in the way of inevitability. You have grown into the stone around you. Your thoughts move with care, your words are measured, your steps are deliberate. You are still the Duchess, still married, still childless. But the urgency of all that has faded into something more permanent, like a scar, like a cathedral built over bones. Your husband has not brought up the annulment again. He won't. Not because he fears you, though perhaps he does in the small, quiet way that men sometimes fear women they don't understand, but because the court has grown used to you, too used to remove you without consequence. You've made yourself a part of the machine, a gear so essential that if it's pulled out, the whole thing groans and shudders, and they know it. You still host, though now with a gravity that commands the room. No more soft pleasantries or shallow chatter. When you speak, people listen. The younger ladies still look to you for guidance, but now they also look for permission. Is this how one behaves when she no longer hopes? Their eyes seem to ask. And you want to tell them, no, this is how one behaves when she stops waiting to be chosen and starts choosing herself. Your salons have evolved into quiet councils. You speak of books, yes, but also of borders. You talk of soil, famine, irrigation, the cost of importing spices during unstable seasons. You speak like a steward. You think like a general. There is a sense, among the more observant, that if the duchy ever fell to siege, it would be you, not your husband, who held the gates. And then, the truly unexpected happens. Your mother dies. The news arrives in a sealed letter, written in a hand you recognise from childhood. Her steward. You sit alone when you read it. The words are practical, respectful, cold. She passed quietly, in her sleep following a winter fever. You're not needed for arrangements. Everything has been settled. There is no invitation to return. You fold the letter, you place it on your desk. Then you take off your ring and stare at the thin line of pale skin beneath it. And you feel nothing. Or rather, you feel something that has no shape. A hollow ache without a wound. You do not weep. You do not write. You simply sit in silence for hours, feeling as if a door has closed somewhere far away, and you hadn't realised you were still hoping it might open again. That night, you walk the halls, not in sorrow, but in inventory. You count your steps. You name each torch. You stand before the chapel and do not enter. Instead, you whisper, "You taught me how to survive." I did, and then you walk away. The next morning you put on black, not for mourning, but for armour. The court offers its condolences. You nod. You smile faintly. You thank them in a voice that does not shake. A few women try to comfort you with gentle phrases about legacy and memory. One lady offers to say a novena on your behalf. You place your hand on hers and say it for someone who still believes prayers change things. She blinks, but she nods. Here's something that rarely appears in the chronicles, the mourning of a woman who had already grieved her mother long before the body went cold. Scholars like to write about the daughters who collapsed in grief, or the ones who seized power through inheritance, but there's little mention of this flavour of sorrow, the quiet, pre-lived kind. The grief that comes from realising you were already alone, and now it's simply official. You begin making changes, subtle but lasting. You reorganise the kitchens. You replace the steward with a woman from your mother's old household, someone who knew your family before the fractures. You redraw the ledgers. You oversee land rentals. You take the empty spaces in your schedule and fill them with things that actually matter. Charity, yes, but also strategy. 1 month after your mother's death, a minor rebellion sparks in the northern woodlands. Nothing large, just a group of disgruntled peasants demanding lower tithes and greater freedom to gather wood. Your husband wants to send soldiers. You advise diplomacy. They want to be heard, you say, not punished. He ignores you, sends the troops anyway. It doesn't go well. 2 soldiers are wounded, 1 dies. The peasants flee into the hills, taking their grudge with them like kindling. Your husband sulks. You write letters. You send envoys. You gather the village elders in the chapel courtyard and listen. Actually listen. Then you adjust the tithe, legalise limited wood gathering, and declare the whole matter settled through God's grace. That week, the baker's wife sends you a honey cake. The message is clear. You're the one we trust now. You add it to your map. That map, the one you've built in secret over the years, is nearly full. Every alliance, every weakness, every favour granted or owed is noted in your own hand. Not just politics, people. You know which serving girl keeps bees in the woods, which knight's son is dyslexic but brilliant at maps, which washerwoman was once a midwife in another province. You see your court not as a hierarchy but a web, and at the centre sits you, not as a spider but as gravity. There's another scholarly debate you've always found amusing. The question of whether women like you actually wielded power or merely shaped it behind the scenes. You wonder sometimes what the difference is. A man gives a command and it's recorded in history. A woman makes 10 people agree on a decision and it vanishes like smoke. But both things shape the world. And you've shaped this one. Your husband grows ill that winter, not dangerously, just enough to be confined to bed for several weeks. You manage everything, the court, the household, the lands, and no one questions it. No one steps in. They bow, report, defer. You sign his documents, you seal his letters, you make rulings in his name that are really your own. You realise as you stand at his bedside one night that even if he were to die tomorrow, you would not be lost. You would not be cast aside. You would be ready. And that terrifies them. All of them. The council, the clergy, even the other women. They've spent years waiting for you to vanish, to be replaced, to wilt under the weight of your unfulfilled role. But instead you've grown, hardened, rooted. You're not a failed queen. You're the queen that wasn't supposed to survive. And yet here you are. As winter melts into spring, a new girl arrives at court. 16, radiant, brimming with poetry and false humility. She curtsies to you with wide eyes and says, "It's an honour to meet you. They say you've never lost a dispute." You take her hand gently and say, "That's not quite true." She waits. Then you smile and add, "But I've never lost one twice." She doesn't understand, but someday she will. Now you rest, not because the battle is over, but because you've earned the pause. You're 27, and you've lived a life they never wrote ballads for. No one composed lute songs for the woman who outlasted disappointment. No bard sings of the princess who was quietly exceptional and unromantically powerful. But you know, deep in your chest, where your heartbeat is steady and full, that you've done more than survive. You've redefined what it means to be royal. You weren't crowned with roses. You weren't rescued or adored. You were tested, scrutinized, pushed to the edge of the tapestry and expected to fade. But instead, you stitched yourself into the frame. The castle breathes in time with you now. Your footsteps echo like punctuation. People know not to interrupt when your finger is on your chin thinking. The couriers pause at your chamber before they run to your husband's. You've become the mind of this place, not by decree but by repetition, by fire, by grace. And no, you never had a child. You'll never be mother to a golden-haired heir or matriarch of a dynasty, but don't mistake absence for failure. In a world that measured women by the fruit of their wombs, you became something else entirely. A legend without a lineage, a queen without a crown. Your legacy lives not in blood, but in memory. In how people now listen when a woman speaks. In how the young girls tuck their chins in pride when you nod at them. In how they dare to imagine something more than what the scrolls dictated. Because of you. You changed the shape of the silence. You were born a princess, but what you became, that was yours alone.